What does a tragic, infamous 1964 murder in a New York City courtyard have to do with um, how a modern hospital successfully collects blood donations?
Yeah, I mean, it really does sound like the setup to a morbid riddle.
It really does.
But the answer to that riddle, the invisible thread connecting a terrifying crime scene to a digital health campaign, is actually the master key to understanding the subconscious machinery running inside your own head.
Right. And I love starting with a mystery. And I want to set the stage for why this specific riddle matters so much, because we all walk around with this deep-seated belief about ourselves.
Oh,
We
definitely.
like to think of ourselves as deeply rational, highly individual thinkers. You face a choice, you weigh the pros and cons on a Wendell spreadsheet, and you act.
Right, the rational actor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when you start peeling back the layers of how the brain actually processes information, you find out that the darkest, most surprising corners of human psychology are, well, they're the exact same forces driving our everyday, mundane decisions.
And that is exactly what we are going to unpack today. In this deep dive, you are about to learn how the academic study of human decision-making, which is a field known as behavioral science, can be practically applied to everyday business
Yeah.
and entrepreneurship and even just basic human communication. Because understanding the subconscious shortcuts your customers or your colleagues and your friends take, well, it isn't just an interesting academic theory.
Right. It's highly practical.
Exactly. It is the ultimate competitive advantage for cutting through the noise in an overwhelmingly loud world.
So we are pulling all of our insights today from the prefatory sections and the introduction of a fascinating book called The Choice Factory by Richard Shotton.
Great book.
It really is. And we're going to be looking at how human behavioral biases influence the choices we make. But before we get to the specific biases, before we even touch on New York City or blood donations, we need to establish the baseline state of the human brain.
Right. You can't understand the software if you don't understand the hardware.
Ex-
And that is a crucial starting point, because the foundational premise of behavioral science, and really the starting point of Shotton's work, is a simple biological reality, which is that we are completely, utterly overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed in what sense, though? Like just busy?
Well, far beyond just having a busy calendar. Think about cognitive load. I mean, traditional economics, the theories that a lot of business models are built on, assumes that humans are rational actors,
Right.
that we have infinite processing power and infinite time to maximize the utility of every choice. But the biological reality is that the human brain makes tens of thousands of micro decisions every single day.
Wow, tens of thousands.
Yeah, from the moment you wake up, your brain is processing, should I hit snooze? What should I wear? Is it cold out? Which route should I take to avoid traffic?
How do I respond to this passive-aggressive email from accounting?
Exactly. And if we actually applied strict rational mathematical logic to every single one of those choices, we would be paralyzed.
Right, you'd stand in the cereal aisle at the grocery store for 3 hours running a comparative cost-benefit analysis on the nutritional density and price per ounce of cornflakes versus oatmeal.
Precisely. We simply do not have the time, the physical glucose, or the cognitive capacity to laboriously weigh every option.
Yeah, makes sense.
I mean, the brain uses about 20% of the body's energy just to function at baseline. So to survive this daily avalanche of information without burning out, the brain evolved to rely on mental shortcuts. We call these heuristics.
So a heuristic is basically a biological coping mechanism.
That is a really great way to think about it. These shortcuts speed up our decision-making so we can actually function in a complex society.
Right.
But the trade-off, and this is where the business application comes in, is that these shortcuts make us prone to predictable biases.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we start making decisions based on context, on habit, on what the crowd around us is doing, or on how information is presented rather than on strict logic.
I want to talk about how the business world views these shortcuts, because there seems to be a massive disconnect here. If our brains operate on these predictable biases, why does it feel like so much marketing and communication is just like screaming logic at us?
It is a massive blind spot, and it's why the reception to this specific book has been so enthusiastic from people who actually understand the science.
Yeah.
I mean, Rory Sutherland, who is a towering figure in the advertising world, he described the choice factor as a Haynes manual for understanding consumer behavior.
Oh, I love that analogy.
Yeah, and Seth Godin noted that it takes the practical jewels of behavioral economics and makes them actionable.
I really have to pause on that Haynes manual analogy because it is just so vivid. For anyone who hasn't spent time in a garage, a Haynes manual is this incredibly detailed, step-by-step guide for stripping down and rebuilding specific models of cars.
Right.
It doesn't judge the car. It just shows you exactly how the engine is wired. So it's basically like having a mechanic's manual or a video game cheat code, but for the human brain.
Yeah, it shows you the wiring, the quirks, the specific torque needed for a specific bolt.
Instead of getting mad that the engine works a certain way, you just learn how to tune it.
Exactly. And that is why Sutherland's comparison is so brilliant. When you are trying to fix a car and the engine needs oil, you don't yell at it for needing oil.
Right.
You don't get frustrated and say, well, logically, water is cheaper and more abundant, so the engine should just run on water.
That would be absurd. You'd destroy the engine.
You would. But in the commercial world, companies are constantly yelling at their customers for not behaving logically.
Yeah, they design a product, they price it based on pure math, they list the features in a bulleted list, and when people don't buy it, they blame the consumer.
Exactly. They try to force water into an engine that runs on oil. And behavioral science provides the Haynes manual for the human brain. It tells you how the machine actually operates.
So it's like having a video game cheat code for human interaction. Instead of fighting the friction of human nature, you learn how to tune the engine.
Yes, and the brands that understand this, companies like Apple or Volkswagen, they are already applying this science.
Right.
They design their messaging, their store layouts, their pricing tiers, all around human shortcuts. Yet, they remain in the absolute minority.
Wow, really?
Yeah, the vast majority of businesses are still fighting against the grain of human nature. They are demanding intense cognitive effort from a brain that is desperate for an easy shortcut.
So, if you are an entrepreneur listening to this, or a manager trying to get your team to adopt a new software, or even a freelancer pitching a client, this is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
You have to stop trying to force your audience to think logically and deeply about your offer.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that their brains are actively looking for the path of least resistance.
Exactly.
Your job is to align your message with the shortcuts they are already taking.
And when you do that, you start pushing a boulder up a hill, and you start riding the momentum of human biology.
But, to truly grasp the raw power of these biological shortcuts,
Yeah.
we really have to look at them in extreme environments.
Yeah.
We have to see what happens when the brain is put under immense pressure, which brings us all the way back to our opening riddle.
Right, New York.
Take us to Kew Gardens, New York in 1964.
Okay, so this is a dark story, but it is a really foundational moment in the history of psychology.
Yeah.
In March of 1964, a 28-year-old woman named Kitty Genovese was walking home to her apartment in Kew Gardens, Queens. And she was stalked and attacked by a serial killer named Winston Moseley.
God, it's just a terrifying scenario.
It is. The attack happened outside her building in a courtyard area that was surrounded by other apartment windows.
Right. But the murder itself, as horrific as it was, isn't what cemented this event in the history books, is it?
No, it wasn't. It was the aftermath.
What happened?
Well, shortly after the murder, the New York Times published a front-page article that completely shocked the nation.
Okay.
The Times reported that for over half an hour, 38 respectable, law-abiding citizens watched this killer stalk and stab Kitty Genovese in separate attacks.
Wait, 38 people?
Yeah, 38. They watched from their apartment windows. And according to the initial reporting, not a single person intervened.
That is unbelievable.
Only one witness eventually called the police, and that was after she had already passed away.
I mean, I can only imagine the cultural fallout from that. If you're reading that over your morning coffee in 1964, what is your takeaway?
The public reaction was just visceral. The press and the public interpreted this as a sign of deep urban apathy.
Like the city just makes people cold.
But exactly.
Yeah.
The narrative was that modern city living had destroyed human empathy, that society was experiencing a moral decay.
Right.
People were asking, what is wrong with these 38 individuals? How could they be so cold and heartless?
So they made it a character flaw. They assumed these 38 people were just bad apples, or that the city itself was toxic.
That was the prevailing theory at the time, yeah. But two psychologists, Bibla Latenay and John Dorley, they looked at this event through a completely different lens. They hypothesized that the public, the police, and the newspapers had the problem entirely backward. They suggested that the Times was asking the wrong question.
I want to dig into their perspective here, because this flips everything we think we know about safety in numbers on its head. What was their hypothesis?
So Latane and Darley proposed that it wasn't that no one intervened despite there being 38 witnesses. They argued that no one intervened because there were 38 witnesses.
Wait, so having more people around actually makes you less likely to receive help.
Yes.
That goes against everything we are taught about crowds.
Yeah.
I mean, we tell kids to stay in crowded, well-lit areas for safety. How does this mechanism actually work in the brain?
It comes down to the psychological math of responsibility. Let's imagine you are the only person walking down a dark, isolated street,
Okay.
and you see someone collapse right in front of you. In that scenario, 100% of the responsibility to help falls entirely on your shoulders.
Right, because there's literally nobody else.
Exactly. If you don't step forward, if you don't call an ambulance, that person will not get help. The moral burden is entirely yours.
The pressure is undeniable. It's
Yeah.
completely binary. I act or they suffer.
Yes. Now, take that exact same emergency and put it in the middle of a crowded courtyard where you know dozens of other people are looking out their windows.
Okay, so the variables change.
Right. The brain, which is always seeking a shortcut to relieve that immense moral pressure, looks at the crowd and the subconscious math shifts.
You assume someone else is going to do it.
Exactly. You assume someone else has already called the police. Or you look at your neighbor's dark windows and think, well, if this were a true life or death emergency, surely the guy in 3B would be running down the stairs.
Right.
And since he's not, you think, maybe I'm overreacting.
So the responsibility gets divided by the number of witnesses.
Exactly. This phenomenon is known in behavioral science as the bystander effect, or the diffusion of responsibility.
Diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah, and Latane and Darley didn't just theorize this. They spent years testing it in rigorous, controlled laboratory experiments and proved it conclusively.
Wow.
The broader the group of bystanders, the less likely any single individual is to actually intervene. The psychological burden diffuses across the crowd until it evaporates completely.
It is a terrifying quirk of human nature, honestly, to realize that an entire apartment complex of good, normal people can be paralyzed simply because of the presence of other good, normal people.
It really is.
But this brings us to the second half of our riddle. How does a 40-year-old psychological insight about a tragic murder in Queens solve a modern advertising problem?
Right, and this is where we introduce the author of our source material, Richard Shotton.
Okay.
Back in 2005, Shotton was working as a media planner on a major campaign for the National Health Service in the UK, specifically their Give Blood campaign.
Now, getting people to voluntarily donate blood is a notoriously difficult marketing challenge. I mean, there's a very high barrier to entry.
Oh, absolutely.
It requires time, there's a needle involved, it's slightly uncomfortable.
It is a massive hurdle. And at the time, the NHS was regularly running these broad national appeals across their digital channels and billboards.
Okay.
The copy on the ads would say things like, "Blood stocks are low across the UK, please help."
Which, if we go back to the idea of the rational actor, sounds perfectly logical. You have a national shortage of blood, you are a national health service, so you make a national appeal to your entire population.
Logically, it is flawless,
Right.
but behaviorally, it is a disaster.
Why?
Because those broad campaigns were failing to generate the necessary volume of donations. Shotton looked at this underperforming campaign and realized that these broad appeals were suffering from the exact same psychological friction that plagued that courtyard in Queens.
Oh, wow.
They were triggering the bystander effect.
I want to trace the mental steps of a person seeing that ad. If I'm sitting on a train in London and I see a digital poster that says, the UK needs blood, my brain's shortcut kicks in. I think, well, the UK has over 60 million people in it. There are probably thousands of people with my blood type who have more free time today than I do.
Exactly.
Someone else will roll up their sleeve.
You've just perfectly articulated the diffusion of responsibility in a commercial setting.
That's wild.
The responsibility to donate diffuses across the entire population of the United Kingdom until it lands on no one.
So what did they do?
Well, Shotton and his team decided to test a hypothesis based on Latane and Darley's work. They thought, if the crowd is the problem, how do you remove the crowd?
But you can't change the population of the UK, so what did they actually tweak in the campaign?
They utilized regional targeting to change the digital copy. So instead of broadcasting a blanket statement to the whole country, they made the ads hyperlocal.
Okay.
If you were browsing the internet in Basildon, the ad you saw would explicitly say, "Blood stocks are low in Basildon, please help."
Oh.
And if you lived in Birmingham, the ad said Birmingham.
So they artificially shrank the crowd.
Yes. By shrinking the geographical scope of the problem, they eliminated that psychological safety net of someone else will do it.
Because suddenly it isn't a nebulous national problem.
Exactly. It is your town's problem. Your local hospital is running out of blood. So the responsibility lands squarely on the shoulders of the individual reading the screen.
And we're talking about a change of literally 2 or 3 words in a digital ad. The UK becomes Basildon. What was the actual business impact of that specific tweak?
The results were immediate and just mathematically undeniable. By simply changing a few words to target a specific location and mitigate the bystander effect, they achieved a 10% improvement in the cost per donation.
I want to pause and make sure we define that metric because it is crucial for anyone running a business. Cost per donation, or in private sector terms, cost per acquisition, or CPA.
Right.
What does that actually mean in this context?
So cost per acquisition is the total amount of money a business spends on marketing and advertising divided by the number of actual customers or actions they acquire. So if you spend $1,000 on ads and get 10 people to buy your product, your CPA is $100. It is really the most vital metric for the health of any campaign.
So a 10% improvement means it was 10% cheaper to acquire a blood donor.
Exactly.
For a national health service spending millions of pounds on advertising, a 10% drop in CPA isn't just a nice little bonus. That is a tectonic shift.
It's massive.
That is millions of pounds saved or thousands of extra units of blood collected for the exact same budget.
It is a massive efficiency gain achieved entirely through understanding the Haynes Manual of the human brain.
If you are managing a team or running a project, think about how often you accidentally trigger the bystander effect in your own daily communication.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Imagine you need a data report pulled. So you send an email and CC 10 of your colleagues. You write, "Hey team, can someone pull the analytics for Q3 by tomorrow?" What happens?
Usually absolutely nothing. You get crickets.
You get crickets because every single person on that email thread sees 9 other names in the to field.
Mhm.
They think, well, Sarah in accounting is probably less busy than I am. She'll do it. And Sarah thinks Dave will do it. You have diffused the responsibility across the inbox.
Exactly.
But if you send an email directly to Sarah that says, "Hey Sarah, can you pull the Q3 analytics by tomorrow?" You get the report in 10 minutes.
Because you've removed the crowd.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So whether it is an internal team email, a multi-million-dollar ad campaign, or a call to action on your startup's homepage, you have to make the appeal hyper-specific.
Yes.
You have to isolate the individual so the responsibility to act lands firmly on their shoulders.
It is a brilliant, practical application of behavioral science. But bringing this up naturally introduces a massive paradox in the business world.
Right, because if this science is so robust, if we have 40-year-old psychological studies that perfectly predict human behavior, and if applying them drives real mathematically proven commercial results like a 10% drop in CPA,
Yeah.
why isn't every marketing agency, every CEO, and every product designer on earth using this as their default playbook?
That is the multi-million-dollar question. I mean, you would assume that a field like marketing, which is obsessed with optimization and ROI, would aggressively adopt peer-reviewed science.
Right.
But the reality is that the marketing and business worlds largely ignore it.
Really?
Yeah, they act as if academia is just this ivory tower, completely divorced from the hard-nosed commercial reality of moving products off shelves.
It feels almost arrogant. Like business leaders believe that once a consumer walks into a grocery store or opens a web browser, they magically shed millions of years of evolutionary biology and become a completely different species.
It is an incredible blind spot. Many professionals rely entirely on anecdote, on unquestioned tradition, or on simply copying whatever their closest competitor is doing.
Wow.
They build campaigns based on gut feeling.
And the source material provides an absolutely scathing analogy for this mindset. It comes from Professor Byron Sharp, and it perfectly captures how absurd it is to ignore behavioral science.
It really does.
He compares modern marketing managers to medieval doctors.
It is a harsh comparison, but when you unpack the history of medicine, the parallel is stunningly accurate.
Tell me more.
So for roughly 2,500 years, the absolute best, brightest, and most highly educated medical minds in human society universally practiced bloodletting.
Let's really paint the picture of what bloodletting was.
Okay.
If you lived in the year 1500 and you went to the most prestigious doctor in Europe with a severe fever, what was their treatment plan?
They would take a lancet, open a vein in your arm, and drain a significant portion of your blood into a bowl.
Oh, man.
If you had a headache, they would drain your blood. If you had indigestion, they would drain your blood. It was the universal default treatment for almost every single ailment.
And from a modern medical standpoint, we know that it's completely useless.
Completely.
In many cases, it was actively fatal. You are taking a patient who is already weakened by illness and depriving them of the very fluids and oxygen-carrying red blood cells they need to fight the infection.
Exactly. George Washington famously died shortly after doctors drained nearly 40% of his blood to treat a throat infection.
That is so tragic.
It is. But the crucial question for Byron Sharp's analogy is why doctors did this for 2.5 millennia. Because they weren't evil. They weren't trying to kill their patients.
Right, they did it because of tradition.
Yeah.
It was based on the ancient theory of the four humors, right? That illness was caused by an imbalance of fluids.
Yes. They operated on impression, myth, and unquestioned authority. The logic was simply, this is how the greatest doctors have always done it, therefore it must be correct.
A classic appeal to authority.
Exactly. They suffered from immense confirmation bias. If a patient survived the bloodletting and got better, the doctor praised the treatment.
And if the patient died?
If the patient died, the doctor assumed the illness was simply too severe to be cured.
So they never questioned the core mechanism. They never asked, does draining blood actually help the human body recover?
Never. It was only through the slow, painful introduction of rigorous scientific experimentation doctors actively challenging those core assumptions with controlled tests that the medical community abandoned bloodletting.
Yeah.
And through that scientific method, they discovered blood transfusions, a procedure that actually works with the body's biology to save millions of lives.
So Byron Sharp is arguing that a massive portion of modern business strategy is essentially corporate bloodletting.
He is. Think about it. When a company launches a product by simply listing its technical specifications because that's the industry standard, or when a pricing page is designed based on what the CEO's gut feels is right.
They are practicing bloodletting.
Exactly. They are operating on myth and tradition without actually testing if those methods align with human nature.
Behavioral science, then, offers the blood transfusion for business.
It does, because behavioral science is not a collection of guru tips or life hacks. This field is built on decades of peer-reviewed experiments by intellectual heavyweights like Daniel Kahneman and Herbert Simon, who literally won Nobel Prizes in economics for mapping the boundaries of human rationality.
That's a serious pedigree.
It is. It provides robust, replicable mathematical evidence.
So if you are auditing your own business practices right now, listening to this, you really need to ask yourself a hard question.
Correct.
Are you practicing medieval bloodletting?
Good question to ask.
Look at how you price your services. Look at the specific words you use in your cold outreach emails. Look at how you onboard a new client. Are you doing things a certain way just because that's what everyone else in our industry does?
Right.
Or are you testing, measuring, and adjusting your strategies based on documented evidence of how the human brain actually processes information?
Because moving from assumption to evidence is really the most profitable pivot a business can make.
Absolutely.
And when you commit to looking at the evidence, when you truly dive into the Haynes Manual, you uncover quirks of the human brain that seem almost like magic.
I am so glad you brought that up, because this next concept is my absolute favorite piece of evidence in the entire deep dive.
It's a good one.
I really want to challenge the idea of perception versus reality. If the NHS example was about changing a few words on a digital screen to alter behavior, what happens when we deal with a physical, tangible product?
Yeah, that's where it gets wild.
Can a psychological shortcut actually alter human biology? Let's talk about the placebo effect, and specifically the red pill.
So the placebo effect is one of the most thoroughly documented phenomena in medicine. Most people understand the basic premise, right?
Yeah.
It is the phenomenon where a medical treatment, like a simple sugar pill or an injection of saline water, produces a real, measurable healing effect simply because the patient expects it to work.
Which, just on a baseline level, is completely mind-blowing.
It really is.
The brain is effectively manifesting pain relief or altering heart rates purely based on belief. There are no active pharmaceutical ingredients entering the bloodstream, yet the body heals.
It is incredible. Neurobiologists have actually mapped this. When a patient believes they are taking a powerful painkiller, the brain's expectation triggers the release of endogenous opioids, the body's natural painkillers.
Wow.
The biology changes because the perception changed.
But the source material takes this a step further. Behavioral science shows that the placebo effect isn't just an on or off switch. It has a volume dial.
It has a very sensitive volume dial. The fascinating nuance here is that seemingly incidental, purely superficial details dramatically boost or diminish the power of the placebo effect.
Like what?
Things like the price of the pill, the physical size of the pill, the taste, and even the physical color of the pill alter how effectively it cures the patient.
I want to unpack the color aspect
Wow.
because the book highlights a fascinating study by a clinical epidemiologist named Anton de Crane.
Yes.
He conducted a systematic review of 12 different clinical studies focusing specifically on painkillers, and he found a consistent, undeniable pattern regarding color.
He did. DeCrane found that, across the board, red painkillers are consistently and significantly more potent than blue painkillers.
Let's be incredibly clear about what that actually means.
Okay.
If you take two groups of people with severe headaches and you give group A a red sugar pill and group B a blue sugar pill, the people who take the red pill will report a faster, more significant drop in physical pain.
Yes. Even if the chemical makeup of the pill is identical, whether it's a placebo or an actual active drug, the red pill physically works better in the human body.
Why? I mean, how does the visual processing of a color alter the nervous system's response to pain?
It comes down to cultural semiotics and the subconscious associations our brains have built up over a lifetime.
Okay.
Our brains are essentially associative prediction machines. So think about it. What does the color red imply in our culture and even in nature?
Red is fire.
Right.
It's blood. It's stop signs and warning labels. It represents strength, heat, danger, and extreme action.
Exactly. When you are suffering from a severe migraine, you feel like you are under attack. You want a powerful, aggressive intervention to eradicate that pain. You want a biological weapon.
Wow.
When you see a red pill, your subconscious instantly associates it with power and fast action. That expectation primes the nervous system for a powerful response.
And what about blue?
Well, blue evokes the exact opposite associations. Blue is the color of the daytime sky. It is the color of a calm ocean. It represents tranquility, coolness, and rest.
So if you want to relax, use blue.
Right. If you are struggling with insomnia and you need a pill to gently coax you to sleep, a blue pill will be highly effective. But if you want to violently destroy a headache, blue feels too passive. The expectation of power literally makes the red painkiller more powerful.
This is where we have to look at the massive, almost unbelievable business application of this data.
Yeah.
Because the source material points out a staggering reality about the pharmaceutical market. In 2016, consumers in the UK spent over £614 million on analgesics, which are just basic over-the-counter painkillers.
Right.
We are talking about a massive, high-value, brutally competitive market.
Absolutely. And pharmaceutical brands spend tens of millions of dollars in laboratories trying to tweak chemical compounds to make their painkiller work 3% faster than the competitor.
Yeah, and they spend millions more fighting for premium shelf space in pharmacies.
They do.
And yet, Richard Shotton recounts a trip he took to a standard Boots pharmacy, which is like a CVS or Walgreens for our American listeners, specifically to look at the painkiller aisle.
Right.
He purchased 7 different packs of over-the-counter painkillers. How many of them were red?
Only one. 1 out of 7.
I am struggling to buy this. Are you seriously telling me that multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies, organizations with endless research and development budgets, armies of data analysts, and massive marketing departments
Yeah.
are just forgetting to dye their pills red? That sounds too absurd to be true. Surely there is a strict regulatory reason preventing them from using red dye, or a massive manufacturing cost issue.
You would think so, because it seems so irrational for a business to ignore a free advantage.
Right.
But no, there is no blanket regulation banning red painkillers. The cost of red dye is negligible. They aren't ignoring it because of external forces.
Then why?
They are ignoring it because they are deeply infected with the bloodletting mindset.
Oh, they literally view the physical presentation of the pill as completely divorced from its medical efficacy.
Exactly. They view packaging, color, and shape as mere aesthetics. They think, well, the chemistry is the medicine, the color is just marketing.
They separate the two.
Yes. They hand the pill over to the design department as an afterthought. They fail to realize what behavioral science proves. The presentation is an active ingredient.
The color sets the expectation, and the expectation alters the biology.
Yes. By ignoring the color, they are leaving millions of dollars of performance and customer satisfaction on the table.
The lesson here stretches so far beyond just manufacturing pills, though.
Oh, definitely.
Whether you are designing a software dashboard, structuring the tiers on a pricing page, or even just formatting a proposal for a client, You can never treat the presentation as an afterthought.
The aesthetics are the interface between your product and the user's subconscious.
The font you choose, the color of your Buy Now button, the weight of the paper you print a contract on, it all sets a subconscious expectation.
It does.
And that expectation physically alters the customer's experience of your value.
Yeah.
If you hand a client a premium heavy stock proposal, the ideas inside it actually feel more profound and reliable than if you emailed them a plain text document.
It is the exact same mechanism as the red pill. You are priming the brain to perceive value.
But this naturally leads to a massive structural question about how companies operate. If it is scientifically proven across 12 different systematic reviews that a red pill cures a headache faster, why don't pharmaceutical companies just run a focus group? Why don't they pull 50 people into a room with a two-way mirror and ask them, hey, what color pill makes your headache go away fastest? What color makes you feel most confident? Then they would have the data.
Well, that instinct to simply ask the consumer what they want is the single biggest trap in modern business.
Wait, really?
Yeah. If a pharmaceutical company asked a focus group that question, they would get completely useless, actively harmful data.
How so?
And this brings us to one of the most profound, uncomfortable insights in all of behavioral science.
That's the flaw of self-reporting.
Yes. Traditional market research is built on a fundamentally flawed assumption that what people say drives their behavior and what actually drives their behavior are aligned.
We are terrible witnesses to our own motivations.
We are the worst possible witnesses. When a market researcher sits in a focus group and asks a consumer, why did you choose the blue box instead of the red box? Or how does this pricing structure make you feel? They are making a category error. They are asking the conscious brain to explain a decision that was actually executed by the subconscious brain.
To really drive this home, the source material uses my favorite analogy of the entire deep dive. It is a quote from the brilliant NYU social psychologist Jonathan Haidt.
So good.
To explain the relationship between the conscious and subconscious mind, Haidt says, the conscious brain thinks it is the Oval Office, but it is actually the press office.
We really need to savor that analogy and explore the mechanics of it because it perfectly encapsulates the human condition.
Let's do it.
Think about how a government functions. The Oval Office is where the president sits. It is where the raw power resides.
Right.
It is where the actual heavy decisions are made, often behind closed doors, based on complex, sometimes messy factors.
The Oval Office decides to go to war or to veto a bill.
Exactly. Now, think about the press office. The press office doesn't make the policy. The press secretary stands in front of a room full of reporters and tries to explain, justify, and spin the decisions that the Oval Office has already finalized.
Right. They craft a coherent, rational-sounding narrative for the public. They smooth over the messy reality to make the administration look competent and logical.
Exactly. And inside your head, your subconscious, emotional, shortcut-seeking brain, the part of you that relies on heuristics and biases, is the Oval Office.
It is running the show.
It is. It decides to buy the wildly expensive sports car, or to click the red notification badge on your phone, or to ignore the charity appeal on the billboard.
It makes those decisions in milliseconds.
Yes. And then a fraction of a second later, our conscious brain, the press office, steps up to the podium.
The conscious brain steps up to the podium and invents a perfectly logical, rational-sounding justification for the behavior that just occurred.
Exactly. So if we imagine a mock focus group for a luxury car brand, the researcher asks a man, why did you spend $80,000 on this sports car when a $20,000 sedan gets you to work just as safely?
The press secretary steps to the podium.
The press secretary says, I bought the sports car because of its superior German engineering, its reliable safety features, and the long-term resale value.
Completely ignoring the Oval Office, which actually bought the car to signal status to the neighbors.
Right.
Or to compensate for a midlife crisis. Yeah. Or just because the engine sounded aggressive.
Precisely. If you ask a consumer why they ignored a charity plea on a national billboard, they will never, ever say, well, there were a lot of other people reading the same ad, so my sense of personal responsibility was diffused, activating the bystander effect.
Right, that makes them sound callous and irrational.
Instead, their press office will confabulate. They will say, I didn't have my credit card on me, or I prefer to do my charitable giving locally at the end of the tax year.
Confabulation is such a vital word here. They aren't lying maliciously. The press secretary actually believes its own spin.
They believe it completely. It is an unconscious mechanism of self-preservation. No consumer will ever admit in a focus group that their severe headache went away faster simply because the pill they swallowed was dyed red. Admitting that a color changed their physical pain levels feels absurd and irrational.
So their press office will say, my headache went away because I rested my eyes, or because I drank a large glass of water with the pill.
Right.
The press office's entire biological imperative is to make us look rational to ourselves and to the tribe around us.
Which is exactly why focus groups so frequently lead businesses off a cliff. If you design your product based on what the press office says it wants, you're designing a product for a rational actor that doesn't actually exist.
Think about the practical takeaway here for anyone trying to persuade an audience or sell a product.
Yeah.
You have to fundamentally change how you gather intelligence.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to stop blindly trusting what people say they will do. Stop relying entirely on surveys, polls, and focus groups where people are just reading you the press releases of their own minds.
You have to start observing how they actually behave in the wild. Watch their hands, not their mouths.
Look at what they actually click on.
Right. Look at where their credit card actually goes. A/B test your pricing in the real world instead of asking a survey group how much they would theoretically pay.
If you ignore the press releases and instead build your strategies around observed behavioral science, around the actual shortcuts the Oval Office is taking, you will instantly gain a massive, almost unfair competitive advantage over every other business that is still listening to the press office.
Okay, let's pull all of these threads together into a single cohesive framework, because we've covered a vast amount of psychological territory today.
We really have.
What is the overarching synthesis here? What is the core truth we're walking away with?
The soul of this entire introduction to behavioral science and the thesis of the choice factory really requires accepting a reality that might feel a little uncomfortable,
Yeah.
maybe even a little bruising to our egos at first, which is that human beings are fundamentally irrational.
We are. But the crucial second half of that sentence, the part that turns this from a cynical observation into a powerful tool, is that we are irrational in highly predictable ways.
Right, the predictability is key.
We are overwhelmed by millions of data points. Our brains are desperately seeking shortcuts just to survive the day. We are driven by subconscious biases that we are completely incapable of accurately explaining to ourselves, let alone to a market researcher in a sterile conference room.
But that predictability is your superpower. By accepting that the conscious brain and just a press office covering for these biases, you stop fighting against human nature.
Exactly.
You stop prescribing medieval bloodletting based on what you wish consumers would do.
You open the Haynes manual. You learn how the engine actually works.
Yeah.
You learn that shrinking the crowd creates action. You learn that the color of the pill is the medicine. You unlock the ability to design strategies, messages, and products that finally work with the grain of the human mind, rather than sourcing it to process logic it doesn't have the energy for.
Now, knowing that our conscious brain is constantly spinning these rational-sounding stories to cover up our subconscious biases, it raises a really fascinating, slightly uncomfortable question for you to ponder.
Oh, definitely.
Think about the last time you saw a stranger make a terrible mistake in public.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you watched a brand stumble in a massive PR crisis. When you watched that happen, did you judge them based on their fundamental personality and character? Or did you judge them based on the context of their specific situation?
Because how you answer that question reveals a specific, incredibly powerful mental trap that shapes almost all of our social and commercial judgments.
And that specific trap is exactly what we will unpack next time when we dive into Chapter 1 and explore the fundamental attribution error. It is going to completely change how you look at every interaction you have. Until then, keep observing what people do, not what they say. I want you to picture a scenario. You're walking down a busy, slightly gray city street.
Okay, I'm with you.
You're heading toward your car, which is parked maybe 100 yards away.
Mm.
You're just going about your day, minding your own business, when you notice a beggar slumped in a doorway up ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And right in front of you, walking in the exact same direction, is a businessman in a very sharp, very expensive-looking pinstripe suit.
Let me guess. He doesn't stop.
Not even close. You watch as this businessman spots the person in the doorway. He actively averts his gaze, suddenly speeds up his walking pace, and just breezes right past without a second glance.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Right. And immediately this automatic thought pops in your head. You think, good God, people are so selfish today.
Oh, absolutely. You judge them instantly.
Exactly. You feel this rising sense of moral superiority. I mean, you are not like that guy in the suit. So you start digging into your own coat pocket, fully intending to do the right thing, to be the better person.
He's going to save the day.
But then your fingers brush against a piece of paper, you pull it out slightly, and you realize you only have a 5-pound note.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's the only cash you have on you, and suddenly the math shifts in your head. You really don't want to part with that specific note.
Right, because it's a bit too much.
Exactly. And before you even fully process the decision, you avert your gaze. You speed up your walking pace, and you walk right past the exact same beggar.
Wow. Yeah.
So I have to ask you directly, and I mean the listener here, are you a hypocrite? Or is there, like, some invisible, completely silent force shaping your actions, pulling the strings behind the scenes without you even realizing it?
Well, it is a beautifully uncomfortable question to start with. Because to answer it honestly requires us to confront a terrifying reality about human nature.
Which is?
Nobody wants to admit that they are just as susceptible to the environment as the person they just judged. I mean, we all desperately need to be the hero of our own internal narrative.
Right. We have to believe we're in control.
Exactly. We have to believe we are calling the shots.
And that uncomfortable realization, that illusion of control, is exactly what we are unpacking in this deep dive today.
Yes, it is.
Because if you are running a business right now, or managing a team, or relying on customer avatars to sell a product, you are about to discover why a massive portion of your budget might just be evaporating into thin air.
Just completely wasted.
Yeah. We are tearing apart something called Bias 1, the fundamental attribution error. It is, at its core, our brain's massive, gaping blind spot.
The ultimate blind spot.
It's this glitch that forces us to blame a person's personality for their actions while completely ignoring the environment they are in. And for anyone listening, understanding this specific bias isn't just like an academic exercise.
No, not at all.
It is the absolute shortcut to predicting customer behavior and stopping strategic blindness in its tracks. So let's jump right in.
That concept of blindness is actually the perfect through-line for what we're talking about today. The fundamental attribution error is defined very clearly in social psychology. Well, it's the human tendency to overestimate the importance of personality and profoundly underestimate the importance of context when explaining behavior.
Okay, so breaking that down with the entry story.
Right. In that opening scenario you just painted, the listener judged the businessman's actions as a permanent, indelible character flaw. They thought, he is a selfish person.
Yeah, like it's built into his DNA.
Exactly. The behavior was attributed entirely to his core identity. But when the listener did the exact same thing 10 seconds later, they didn't suddenly classify themselves as selfish.
No, of course not. We're the good guys in our heads.
Right. They blamed fleeting contextual factors. They thought, well, I only have a large banknote, or maybe I'm running a little late, I don't have time to stop.
Wow, so we generously recognize context for ourselves.
But we ruthlessly deny it to everyone else, yes.
Okay, let's unpack this through a different lens. It's almost like a hardware versus software issue.
Oh, I like that. How do you mean?
Well, when someone else makes a mistake, we assume their hardware is broken, like they just have a defective personality.
Right.
But when we make a mistake, we know our hardware is fine. We were just running a buggy piece of software because we had low battery, or we were stressed, or, we only had a 5-pound note.
That's a great analogy. We completely blur the lines between the situation a person is placed in and who they fundamentally are.
But why do we do this?
Yeah.
I mean, evolutionarily, biologically, why does our brain take the path of least resistance and default to this error so consistently?
It primarily comes down to metabolic energy and the preservation of the ego.
Metabolic energy, like calorie burning.
Literally, yes. The brain is an energy-expensive organ. It takes a lot of cognitive calories to analyze a stranger's entire environmental context.
Like trying to figure out where they're going, what pressures they're under, what their bank account looks like.
Exactly. That takes work. It is incredibly fast and metabolically cheap to just slap a label on them and say selfish.
So it's cognitive laziness.
That's part of it. But beyond just cognitive laziness, it dramatically boosts our own self-image. It appeals to our ego to believe that humans are these paragons of rationality.
We want to believe we're fully in control.
Yes. We want to think we're making deliberate, conscious choices based on our deep-seated moral values.
Because to admit otherwise To admit that, like, a minor change in our physical environment can completely hijack our moral compass.
It's a terrifying proposition for the human ego. It completely strips away our autonomy.
Right. Because if I admit that the businessman was just stressed out, then I have to admit that my own good deeds aren't because I'm a saint.
Exactly.
They might just be because I happen to have a good morning and a pocket full of loose change.
That is the harsh reality. And that actually leads us perfectly into an experiment from Stanford University that exposes this blind spot in a remarkably controlled way.
Oh, I know this one. The 1977 Lee Ross experiment, right?
Yes, the 1977 Lee Ross experiment. It is the gold standard for illustrating this exact dynamic. Ross recruited 36 students to take part in a simulated game show quiz.
Okay, 36 students.
He randomly assigned half of the students to be questioners and the other half to be contestants.
Seems fair so far.
Well, the setup is where the brilliance lies. The questioners were given 15 minutes to sit down and invent 10 incredibly tricky questions based on a topic of their own choosing.
Wait, of their own choosing?
Yep, something they were personally deeply knowledgeable about.
Which is, frankly, an insanely unfair advantage.
Completely unfair.
I mean, if I get to write 10 questions about obscure 1990s indie rock bands, I'm going to look like an absolute genius.
You look brilliant.
And the person trying to answer them is going to look completely clueless. The context is entirely rigged in my favor.
And the results played out exactly as you'd expect. The contestants had to sit in the hot seat and answer these highly specific, mind-boggling questions, and they struggled terribly.
I bet.
They got most of the answers wrong. But here's the thing. Ross wasn't testing their trivia knowledge. He was testing their perception.
Okay, so what did he ask them?
At the end of the game, both parties were asked to rate each other's overall general knowledge.
Oh, wow.
Now, logically, the contestants should have said, I have no idea how smart that person is. They only knew the answers because they literally wrote the questions.
Right. They had the answer sheet.
But they didn't say that. The contestants rated the questioner's general knowledge significantly higher than the questioners rated the contestants.
You're joking. They completely ignored the rigged room.
They completely ignored it.
Yeah.
Both sides attributed the outcome of the quiz to raw intelligence and personality rather than the obvious structural advantage of the environment.
They looked at a person who held all the answers on a piece of paper they themselves wrote and thought, wow, that person's fundamental personality is just genius.
They bought into the illusion completely. And if we bring this back to the listener, specifically, the entrepreneur or the marketer, the practical takeaway here is foundational.
Which is what?
You simply cannot trust what people say about their underlying character or their motivations. And you absolutely cannot attribute their buying behavior to some deep psychological brand loyalty.
Okay, hold on. I want to push back on that a bit.
Go ahead.
Because entire marketing departments, like multi-million-dollar agencies, are built on the idea of brand loyalty.
They are.
Are you saying that if someone consistently buys a certain brand of coffee, it has nothing to do with them identifying with the brand's personality?
What I am saying is that you must look at the context first.
Yeah.
Look, if someone buys your product, marketers love to spin a narrative that the consumer is deeply in love with the brand's story or, its ethical sourcing.
Right. It makes the brand feel special.
It strokes the marketer's ego.
Yeah.
But in reality, the driving force might just be that your product is placed exactly at eye level on the supermarket shelf.
Ah.
And the consumer is usually shopping after a long day of work when their cognitive energy is depleted. They grab the easiest thing.
So the behavior looks like loyalty, like a personality trait, but it's actually just a reaction to the physical environment.
Exactly. We misread convenience as devotion.
That is a massive strategic blindness for anyone running a business. Wow.
It really is.
But let's take this a step further. We've talked about a simulated game show, which is a pretty low-stakes environment. What happens when you test this on people whose entire life trajectory, their entire identity, is supposedly built on an unshakable foundation of morality?
Oh, yes. The classic experiment.
I mean, most people listening to this have probably heard of the Good Samaritan study in passing. But we almost always focus on the moral failing of the participants. We completely miss the specific data points that actually explain the behavior.
We do miss the mechanics of it, and the mechanics are what actually matter here. So
Yeah.
this is the 1973 Princeton University experiment by psychologists John Darley and Daniel Batson.
Right.
The paper is famously titled From Jerusalem to Jericho, And they didn't just test average college students. They took 40 trainee Catholic priests.
Seminary, still.
Seminary students? These are individuals who have literally dedicated their lives, their careers, and their souls to morality and helping their fellow man.
Right. If anyone has the hardware to pass a morality test, it's a trainee priest.
You cannot find a group of people with a stronger theoretical personality for doing good.
So how did they set it up?
To establish a baseline, Darley and Batson first had these trainee priests fill out a survey. They wanted to probe the underlying personality trait. Why did they join the priesthood?
Okay, to see what their internal motivation was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Was it to help others in a practical, outward-facing way? Or was it an inward-facing desire for personal salvation? This gave the researchers a quantifiable metric of their stated values.
Makes sense.
Then they gave them a task. They told each priest to record a 5-minute audio talk, but they had to walk across campus to a different building to actually do the recording.
And here's where the psychological priming comes in, right?
Yes, half of these priests were assigned to record a highly mundane talk about graduate jobs, just standard career stuff. But the other half were assigned to talk specifically about the parable of the Good Samaritan.
Oh, wow. The ultimate biblical story about stopping to help a stranger in distress.
Exactly. A stranger who has been beaten and left on the side of the road. It is the most salient moral message you could possibly put into a priest's working memory.
They are literally rehearsing the words of the parable in their heads while they walk.
Yes. But then the researchers introduced the true variable of the experiment. They manipulated the context of time.
The ticking clock.
As the students left for the other building, they were randomly placed into one of 3 conditions. Condition 1 was the high hurry.
What did they tell them?
The researcher looked at their watch and said, "Oh, you're late. They were expecting you a few minutes ago. We'd better get moving."
Bro, instant stress.
Condition 2 was the intermediate hurry. They were simply told, "The assistant is ready for you, so please go right over."
Okay, normal pace.
And condition 3 was the low hurry. They were told, "It'll be a few minutes before they're ready for you, but you might as well head on over."
Okay, so you have this incredibly vivid picture. You have trainee priests walking down an alleyway. Some are sprinting, some are power walking, some are just casually strolling. Some are thinking about corporate jobs, and some are literally muttering the Good Samaritan parable under their breath.
Yeah.
And then the psychologists spring the trap.
In a narrow alleyway on the route between the 2 buildings, the priests had to walk past a stooge, an actor working for the researchers.
Right.
This man was slumped in a doorway, his head down, his eyes closed. As the priest approached, the man would begin coughing and groaning in obvious, undeniable distress.
That is genuinely ruthless. Darley and Batson effectively recreated the exact physical scenario of the parable the priests were thinking about.
Down to the last detail.
You are creating a situation where a trainee priest on his way to deliver a sermon about helping a dying man has to physically step over a groaning man to get to the microphone.
That is exactly what happened.
So break down the numbers for us. When the context and the personality collide like that, what actually happens?
The destruction of personality is almost total.
Wow.
Overall, across all the groups, only 40% of the priests stopped to help.
Less than half.
But when you stratify the data by the environmental context, the time pressure, the numbers are staggering. In the low hurry condition, where they had plenty of time and no stress, 63% stopped to help.
Okay, that's better.
In the intermediate hurry condition, it dropped to 45%. But in the high hurry condition, where they were told they were late, only 10% stopped.
10%. Only 1 in 10 trainee priests stop.
Only 1 in 10. And what makes this the ultimate proof of the fundamental attribution error is what didn't matter.
What do you mean?
The personality metric, whether they joined the church for personal salvation or to help others, had absolutely 0 statistical impact on whether they stopped.
Really? None at all?
0. But even more profoundly, the topic of the sermon made no difference.
Wait, you're saying the ones thinking about the Good Samaritan didn't stop more often?
Not at all. John Darley wrote in his conclusion that the subject of the talk made not a jot of difference.
That is mind-blowing.
The priests who were actively rehearsing the Good Samaritan parable were no more likely to stop than the ones thinking about graduate jobs.
So the invisible force of the environment, just a simple ticking clock,
Yeah.
completely and utterly trumped deeply held, lifelong religious values.
It wiped them out entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that is the financial blindness we were talking about earlier. If a consumer is rushed, their stated personality basically vanishes.
Yes.
But I want to dig into the neurobiology of this for a second, Because as a human being, it is deeply unsettling to think that I could be thinking about helping someone, see someone who needs help, and just ignore them.
It is unsettling.
What is mechanically happening in the brain when we are put under that kind of time pressure? They didn't just suddenly become evil, right?
No, of course they didn't, and that is the crucial mechanism to understand. The explanation relies on a psychological framework pioneered by Edward Tolman, which he called the narrowing of the cognitive map.
Narrowing of the cognitive map. What does
Okay.
that mean?
To understand this, you have to look at how the brain processes stress. When you are told you are late, your body triggers a mild fight-or-flight response. Cortisol and adrenaline begin to flood the system.
Right.
Biologically, your brain decides that the most critical threat to your survival, or in this case, your social standing, is being late for this appointment.
So the brain effectively triages the environment. It ranks the priorities.
Precisely. To conserve metabolic energy for the primary task of getting to the building, your brain literally reduces your peripheral processing. It forces you into a state of tunnel vision.
Oh, wow.
The cognitive map, the mental representation of your environment and the variables within it, shrinks dramatically. The students in a hurry didn't go physically blind.
Right, they still had eyes.
In the post-experiment interviews, almost all of them recalled seeing a man in the doorway, but their working memory was so crowded by the pressing engagement that they lacked the mental bandwidth to process the visual information, evaluate it as an emergency, and translate it into the physical action of stopping.
So stress acts like a shutter on a camera lens, reducing the aperture of our perception.
That's a perfect way to put it. The context physically narrowed their ability to think morally.
That is a massive insight for anyone trying to communicate a message. If you are a marketer and you are trying to reach a consumer when their cognitive map is narrowed by stress or time pressure, your message isn't just being ignored.
It's practically invisible.
Yeah, it's invisible to their conscious brain. It cannot pass through the biological filter.
Exactly.
But I am going to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
I can hear people listening to this and thinking, okay, that study is from 1973. A pint of beer cost 14 pence. We only have 3 TV channels, and the internet was decades away.
True.
Surely, modern consumers are completely different. I mean, we have the sum of all human knowledge in our pockets. We are hyper-aware, hyper-connected. Haven't we evolved past being tricked by a ticking clock?
What you are articulating is known in the industry as the myth of the changing consumer.
The myth of the changing consumer.
Yes. And it is a myth that modern advertising agencies desperately, fiercely want you to believe.
Why?
They want you to think that today's consumer is a radically evolved, highly complex new species that requires advanced technological interpretation. But human neurobiology does not change in 50 years.
Right.
There is a legendary quote from the advertising pioneer Bill Bernbach that perfectly captures this reality.
What did he say?
He said, "It took millions of years for man's instincts to develop. It will take millions more for them to even vary. A communicator must be concerned with unchanging man."
Unchanging man. I love that phrasing because it completely strips away all the technological vanity we hide behind.
It really does.
We assume that because we are scrolling on an iPhone rather than, reading a broadsheet newspaper, we have somehow developed a different cerebral cortex than someone living in 1973.
Which is biologically absurd.
It reminds me of the diet and fitness industry.
Oh, how so?
Well, every single year, without fail, there is a new, incredibly complex, hyper-scientific diet fad. They invent an entire lexicon of new jargon. We're talking macros, ketosis states, intermittent fasting protocols, biohacking.
Right.
And it's all designed to sell you a new stack of books and supplements.
Right.
But the fundamental biology of human digestion, like how our bodies process glucose and store fat, hasn't changed in tens of thousands of years.
Exactly.
A caloric deficit works today the exact same way it worked for the ancient Romans. But the industry thrives financially on convincing you that the biological rules have somehow shifted, and therefore you need to buy their new map to navigate it.
That is a phenomenal analogy. And the marketing industry operates on that exact same blueprint of manufactured complexity.
So they're selling us a problem that doesn't exist.
Pretty much. Bob Hoffman, who is a brilliant critic of the industry and author of Marketers Are from Mars, Consumers Are from New Jersey, outlines exactly why this myth is so heavily funded and perpetuated.
What's his take?
He argues that ad agencies create an avalanche of exaggerated claims and dire warnings to convince brands that the world is changing at breakneck speed.
And why do they do that? Follow the money, I assume.
Always follow the money. If everything is changing, if the modern consumer is an alien species, then brands are terrified. And terrified brands need to hire expensive agencies to act as interpreters of this brave new world.
Wow.
It keeps the agencies relevant, it justifies their massive retainer fees, and it secures their profits. It is a fabricated vested interest, not a biological truth.
Okay, but theories aside, how do we know for absolute certain that we haven't changed? Has anyone actually taken the premise of the Good Samaritan study and
Yeah.
tested it on the so-called modern, hyper-connected consumer?
Yes, they have. And the results are an incredible indictment of our collective blind spot.
Okay, lay it on me.
Richard Shotton and Laura McLean recently ran a modern replication of Darley's experiment. Now, they couldn't practically put actors in alleyways across the country, so they ran a thought experiment using modern tools.
How did they do it?
They utilized Google surveys to poll 433 people in the present day. They presented the respondents with the exact scenario. Imagine a man slumped in a doorway, visibly in need of help,
Okay.
who is more likely to stop and assist him, a man who is deeply caring by nature but is currently in a rush, or a man who is not particularly caring but has plenty of free time.
So they are pitting the stated personality directly against the environmental context, just asking people to predict the outcome.
Exactly.
Let me guess.
Yeah.
Even with all our modern self-awareness, people still got it wrong.
They didn't just get it wrong. They got it spectacularly invertedly wrong.
Oh boy.
I'll let you guess the split. What percentage of modern respondents do you think predicted the caring man in a rush would be the one to stop?
Well, knowing how much we cling to the idea of personality, I'd say probably 60 or 70% still backed the caring man.
Higher.
Higher.
81% of the people surveyed predicted that the caring man in a rush would stop. Only 19% predicted that the man with time would stop.
That is wild. 81% of people predicted the exact mathematical opposite of the reality proven by the Princeton study.
Exactly. And this data proves two deeply important things.
What's the first?
First, the biological bias still exists. Context still completely overrides personality, regardless of the decade.
And the second?
Second, and perhaps more importantly, we are still completely blind to it. We still consistently, overwhelmingly believe that personality is the ultimate driver of human behavior.
So what's the practical takeaway for the listener here?
It's an absolute mandate. Do not build your business model, your product design, or your marketing strategy around the idea of a new modern consumer.
Just ignore it completely.
Stop obsessing over generational buzzwords like Gen Z behaviors versus millennial behaviors. Human instincts are fixed. Unchanging man is who is buying your product.
Okay, so if human nature is fixed, and if we accept that context, the environment rules over everything else, how do we physically apply this to a modern business strategy?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, if I am a business owner, allocating capital, buying digital ads, or designing a user experience, how do I actually weaponize this knowledge?
This is where we make the most crucial pivot for the listener, because understanding the Good Samaritan experiment fundamentally undermines and frankly destroys advertising's most deeply held, sacred, billion-dollar belief,
Which is?
the concept of the core target audience.
Wait, hold on. You are attacking the foundation of modern digital marketing right now.
I am.
Every single marketing textbook, every agency brief,
Yeah.
every Facebook ad campaign starts with the question, who is our target audience?
Right. Who is our demographic?
Yeah, we build these elaborate, highly detailed customer avatars like meet Susan. Susan is 35. She has a disposable income of $50,000. She loves hot yoga. She drinks oat milk lattes, and she scores high in trait agreeableness.
We've all seen those slide decks.
Exactly. We define their personality to a microscopic level. Are you telling me that is a waste of time?
If it's your only focus, yes.
Because Meta's entire algorithm, a trillion-dollar infrastructure, it's built on knowing exactly who Susan is and what she clicks on. If Susan is highly predisposed to buy yoga pants, why does it matter where she is when she sees the ad? A click is a click.
Because that entire trillion-dollar infrastructure is walking right into the ego trap of personality over context.
How so?
What Darley and Batson proved with the priests in the alleyway is that the perfect personality means nothing in the wrong environment.
Right.
If context dictates behavior more than personality, then brands must focus equally, if not more, on target contexts as they do on target audiences.
Okay, let's use Susan.
Let's look at Susan. Susan loves yoga pants, but if you serve an ad to Susan when she is frantically scrolling through her phone on a crowded train while running late for a meeting, She is the priest in the high-hurry condition.
Yeah, she is a distracted consumer.
Exactly. Her cortisol is up, her cognitive map is severely narrowed, and her brain is filtering out non-essential peripheral stimuli.
Like your ad for yoga pants.
Precisely. Communicating with her in that specific context is a complete and utter waste of money, no matter how perfectly she matches your demographic profile. The message never breaches the biological filter.
So what does this all mean? We are spending fortunes trying to talk to people who are biologically incapable of listening at that specific moment.
That is exactly what we are doing.
That is a terrifying thought for anyone looking at their ad spend right now. How do we prove this empirically? Like, how do we prove that the physical context of the moment matters more than the demographic profile of the person seeing the ad?
Let's look at two major empirical studies, one in the physical world and one in the digital world, to prove this point unequivocally.
Let's start with the physical world.
The physical offline study was conducted in 2008 by CBS Outdoor in partnership with TNS, a major research firm. It was aptly named the Total Recall Experiment.
Okay, the total recall experiment.
They recruited 290 participants right off the street. These people thought they were just coming in for a standard interview.
Standard setup.
The researchers split them into two groups. The first group was rushed straight down a corridor that was lined with poster ads and ushered directly into an interview room.
Oh, they were rushed.
Yes, they had maybe 3 seconds of exposure to the ads while in motion.
So effectively, the high-hurry alleyway condition from the Princeton study, but for advertising.
Exactly. Now, the second group of participants was treated very differently. They were led into a waiting room that was lined with the exact same posters.
And let me guess, they had to sit and wait.
They sat there, unbothered, for 3 minutes before being taken down the same corridor to their interview. This is the low-hurry condition.
Okay, so what happened?
Later, when both groups were asked to recall the ads they had been exposed to, the difference in memory encoding was staggering.
The waiting room group did better, obviously.
Much better.
Hmm.
The group that had the 3-minute context, the relaxed waiting room, was 6 times more likely to recall the ad overall.
6 times.
They were 4 times more likely to remember specific granular details of the ad. And most importantly for a business, they were a staggering 14 times more likely to correctly remember the brand name.
14 times more likely to remember the brand. And the only thing that changed was the context of how much time they had.
That's the only variable.
But explain the neurology there. Why does a 3-minute waiting room completely alter memory retention compared to a 3-second walk?
It has to do with how the hippocampus encodes memory. When you are walking down a corridor to an appointment, your brain is engaged in spatial navigation and anticipating the future interaction.
Right, you're focused on the goal.
The visual data of the posters enters your sensory memory. But because your working memory is occupied with the task of walking and preparing, the sensory data is immediately dumped. It's categorized as irrelevant.
It just goes in one eye and out the other.
Exactly. But in the waiting room, the cognitive load is near zero. The individual is relaxed. In this state of low stress, the brain is actively seeking stimulation.
Because they're bored.
Right. The visual data from the posters moves from sensory memory into working memory. And through repetition over those 3 minutes, the hippocampus begins to encode it into long-term memory.
Wow.
The context of relaxation literally opens the neurological pathway for the brand to enter the brain.
It's like how IKEA designs their stores.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Yeah, they don't put you in a straight, fast corridor where you can sprint to the exit. They create this winding, maze-like environment.
Yes, the Gruen effect.
It physically slows down your walking pace, which lowers your stress and widens your cognitive map, so you suddenly notice and remember all these peripheral items like candles and Swedish meatballs that you never intended to buy.
Exactly. They are architects of a low-hurry context.
But offline physical space is one thing. What about online? Because digital marketing is completely different.
Is it, though?
Well, we aren't in waiting rooms. We are scrolling. We are tracking clicks and impressions by the millisecond. Does context still dictate behavior when we are staring at a screen?
The digital data is even more sobering, actually. And it exposes a massive flaw in how we buy media.
Okay, let's hear it.
There is a company called Lumen Research that specializes in eye-tracking technology. They don't track clicks. They track where the human pupil is actually looking on the screen.
Oh, wow. That's precise.
Very. They analyzed a massive data set of over 100,000 print ad impressions. And they found a very clear biological threshold for memory.
Which is?
If an ad is viewed for less than 1 second, only 25% of people will be able to recall it. But if that ad is viewed for just 1 to 2 seconds, recall jumps massively to 45%.
Okay.
Based on this hard biological data, the founder of Lumen, Mike Follett, argues that advertisers must aim for an absolute minimum benchmark of 1 second of actual visual view time.
1 second. That sounds incredibly achievable. I mean, 1 second feels like nothing in the grand scheme of a day.
It does sound easy. So Lumen then took their eye-tracking tech and analyzed natural browsing behavior across nearly 54,000 online display ad impressions.
These are the banner ads and sidebar ads,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, the standard display ads you see on websites. Let's play the guessing game again.
Oh, no. I'm terrible at this.
Out of those 54,000 impressions, what percentage do you think crossed that minimum 1 second benchmark of being actually looked at?
Well, considering how much money flows into digital display ads, I'd hope at least half, maybe 40% to 50% are viewed for a full second.
4%.
Wait, what?
Lumen found that only 4% of online display ads are looked at for more than 1 second.
4%? Are you kidding me?
Moshe was.
So that means 96% of the online display ads that businesses are paying for are functionally invisible.
Yes.
The consumer's just rushing past them, scrolling down the page to get to the content, treating the ad like the groaning man in the alleyway.
That is exactly what is happening. The thumb movement of scrolling is a primary task, driven by a dopamine loop seeking the next piece of content.
And the ad is just a distraction.
The ad is a peripheral distraction that the brain filters out. The practical takeaway here is that advertisers must completely reevaluate the metrics they trade on.
What do you mean?
The entire digital industry standard is built on trading CPM cost per 1,000 impressions. But an impression is just a pixel loading on a screen.
It doesn't mean anyone looked at it.
Exactly. It does not equal human attention. Instead of buying cheap, fast impressions on sites where people are rapidly scrolling, advertisers should consider trading on time spent.
Give me an example of what trading on time spent looks like in practice.
Look at the context of the platform. Lumen's data shows that ads placed on national press websites or long-form journalism sites have a 6 times higher average view time than ads placed on standard display domains or fast-feed social media.
Why is that?
Because the context of the user has changed. When someone goes to a national press site, they are sitting down to read a 2,000-word article. They have physically and mentally decelerated.
Their cognitive map has widened?
Exactly. Their eyes are moving slower. In that context, an ad has a profoundly higher chance of crossing the 1 second threshold and entering working memory.
That makes total sense.
Think about Spotify. Serving a high-energy ad for a pre-workout supplement makes sense if the context is a heavy metal workout playlist.
Right, the user's heart rate is up, they are active.
But serving that same ad to the exact same demographic profile when they're listening to a sleep sounds playlist at 11 p.m. is a waste of money. The context dictates the receptivity.
So to synthesize this,
Yeah.
demographics tell you who might theoretically want your product.
Yes.
But context tells you when their brain is actually biologically capable of processing your message.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Yes. Reaching Susan the yoga mom when she is frantically scrolling on the subway is useless. But reaching Susan when she is sitting on her couch on a Sunday morning, slowly reading a long-form article, is incredibly valuable.
Precisely. You must pair the audience with the context. If you don't, you are just shouting into a void of narrowed cognitive maps.
We shouldn't abandon the demographic avatar entirely,
Yeah.
but we have to marry the avatar to the environment. I love this, but it also highlights a really scary practical problem for the entrepreneur listening right now.
What's that?
If context is everything, and human intuition about context is usually wrong, like we saw with the 81% of people guessing the wrong outcome in the survey, how do you know which context actually works for your specific product?
That is the big hurdle.
What if you guess wrong? I mean, John Darley and Daniel Batson guessed wrong.
They did?
They assumed that a context involving the ultimate biblical parable about helping people would trigger helping behavior. It was a beautiful, deeply logical theory.
Mm-hmm.
And it was entirely 100% wrong. It made zero difference.
You've hit on the most critical final step of this entire philosophy, the Feynman principle.
The Feynman principle.
The reality is you cannot just guess the right context in a boardroom. You must test your assumptions against reality. And you bring up a great point about beautiful theories. In marketing, we absolutely love beautiful theories. Agencies love sitting in glass boardrooms and spinning up elegant narratives about how the consumer will emotionally react to our clever copy in a specific environment.
Oh, totally. The consumer will see this billboard on their commute, feel a sense of longing for adventure, and immediately book our travel package.
Exactly. But to counter that, we look to the Nobel laureate physicist Richard Feynman. He had a defining philosophy on the scientific method.
What did he say?
He famously said, "It doesn't matter how beautiful your theory is, it doesn't matter how smart you are, if it doesn't agree with the experiment, it's wrong."
Wow.
If your beautiful boardroom theory about customer context doesn't trigger behavior in the real, messy physical world, the theory is garbage. You have to discard it.
But historically, discarding theories and running experiments has been the domain of Fortune 500 companies.
And used to be, yes.
How does a small business owner or a solo entrepreneur actually test contexts without spending $50,000 on a market research firm to run focus groups? Because that is the real barrier to entry.
That used to be the barrier. But the takeaway for today's landscape is to research little and often.
Little and often.
We live in an era where the tools for testing human behavior are completely democratized and incredibly cheap. You don't need a massive agency.
What do you use instead?
You can use modern digital tools like Google Surveys. You can set up a split test to ask a single targeted question among a nationally representative group of thousands of people for as little as 7 pence, about 10 cents per person.
10 cents a person.
Yes. And you get statistically significant data back in 1 to 2 days.
That is incredibly liberating.
Yeah.
You're saying that research is no longer this annual, expensive behemoth of a project. It is a daily functional tool.
It has to be a daily tool. If you have a hypothesis that your ad will work better on a podcast than on a visual social feed, you don't debate it in a meeting for 3 weeks.
You just test it.
You test it. You spend a tiny amount of money to run a localized experiment, and you let the data tell you the truth.
Let the real-world context prove or disprove your assumption.
Exactly. We have to ruthlessly strip away our ego, not just in how we judge the businessman on the street, but in how we judge our own marketing strategies.
We have to humbly admit that we don't know the answers until we test the environment.
Let the experiment do the talking.
This has been such a paradigm-shifting conversation.
Yeah.
We've covered incredible ground today.
You really have.
From the visceral blindness of the priests in the alleyway to the biological narrowing of our cognitive maps under stress, the financial delusion of the changing consumer, the fact that 96% of online ads are functionally invisible, and finally, the democratization of testing our way to the truth.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So if we have to pull all of these disparate threads together, how do we synthesize this entire chapter into one clear, memorable, undeniable insight for the listener?
If we synthesize everything we've unpacked today, the soul of this chapter comes down to this realization. The fundamental attribution error teaches us that human beings are not rigidly programmed robots acting out permanent, unyielding personalities. We are deeply reactive, highly porous creatures, constantly being molded, blinded, and manipulated by the invisible forces of our environment.
So what's the ultimate insight?
For anyone in business, the ultimate insight is this. Stop trying to change who your customer is and start changing the environment in which you speak to them.
Stop trying to change who they are and start changing the environment in which you speak to them. That is brilliant.
It changes everything.
It completely reframes the job of a marketer or an entrepreneur. You are no longer trying to be a manipulator of minds or a persuader of personalities.
No.
You are tasked with being an architect of environments. You are looking for the exact moment when their cognitive map is wide open, rather than trying to force your way through the door when stress has slammed it shut.
Yes, and to further that, you are accepting humanity as it actually is, rather than how your ego wishes it to be.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening and, honestly, somewhat humbling deep dive into the invisible forces that dictate our lives.
It's been great.
But we are far from done exploring the hidden architecture of human behavior. Next time, we're going to explore what happens when we strip away our own compass entirely and look to the crowd for cues on how to act.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, we'll dive into why proving you are already popular is the ultimate, undeniable business cheat code. We're diving headfirst into the fascinating, sometimes dangerous world of social proof.
Looking forward to it.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. We started this journey by looking outward, judging the businessman and the beggar. But let's turn that lens inward.
Right.
If a simple ticking clock The mere suggestion of being a few minutes late can completely override a devoted priest's lifelong commitment to the ultimate lesson of the Good Samaritan. Consider your own life.
It's a tough question to ask yourself.
Think about your own past. How many of your most regrettable decisions, your harshest words, or your most uncharacteristic mistakes weren't actually deep flaws in your core character? How many of them were simply the result of a bad context? So imagine you're driving to the station, right? It's, say, a Tuesday morning.
Okay.
You've got your coffee in the cup holder. Your mind is, already running through the logistics of your first meeting. And the radio's just kind of humming in the background. And as you're waiting at a red light, you spot a huddle of pedestrians on the sidewalk.
Just standing there.
Right, completely motionless.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all craning their necks, staring dead ahead, just right up into the dense branches of this large oak tree.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right, because before you even consciously process the scene, before you run through the probabilities of whether it's like a stranded cat or a falling branch or some weird urban wildlife, what do?
You look up.
You look up, you find your foot pressing down just a little bit harder on the brake, you lean over the steering wheel, you're squinting through the windshield, and you look up into the exact same branches.
Yeah.
You don't even know what you're looking for. But just the sheer physical gravity of their collective attention, it just forces your eyes upward.
It's an almost mechanical response. I mean, your conscious mind hasn't even really had the time to boot up and assess the situation, but the ancient hardwired machinery of your brain has just completely taken the wheel.
Yeah.
We are magnetically and honestly unavoidably pulled to look where others are looking, to value what others value, and just to adopt the behaviors of the crowd that's surrounding us.
And that intersection on a Tuesday morning is, to me, it's just the perfect encapsulation of the core tension we're navigating in this deep dive. Because, we hold on to this really flattering self-image of our own autonomy.
Oh, absolutely.
We build our entire identities around the idea that we are fiercely independent, right? That we're highly rational decision makers who weigh the empirical pros and cons of literally every choice, like from the car we drive to the software we buy for our business.
We love to think of ourselves as the main character who's totally in control.
Exactly. But the uncomfortable reality is that our brains are, fundamentally structured to outsource the heavy lifting of decision-making to the herd. The behavior of others doesn't just influence our choices.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of cases, it entirely dictates them.
Right. And the psychological mechanism driving that is known as social proof. And if you're navigating the worlds of business or entrepreneurship or really human behavior in any capacity, understanding the architecture of social proof is not optional. Today, we're exploring how leveraging the popularity of your product, or even just the illusion of it, is one of the most powerful, cost-effective shortcuts to driving massive growth.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It requires minimal financial capital, but it requires a pretty profound shift in how we understand human agency.
It really does.
So we have to strip away this illusion of the purely rational consumer and look at the raw mechanics of conformity. I want to start by anchoring this in the foundational science.
Yeah.
Because the realization that we are essentially just herd animals wearing suits, it didn't just emerge in the era of social media metrics, right?
No, not at all.
The empirical proof of this goes back almost a century. We're talking about a laboratory in 1935 with Muzaffar Sharif.
Right, sure.
He was probing the edges of human perception and conformity way before we even had a vocabulary for modern behavioral economics.
Yeah, Muzaffar Sharif's work is really the absolute bedrock of modern social psychology. And what he wanted to understand wasn't just, whether people followed a crowd. He wanted to see how a crowd actually manufactures reality for the individual.
Manufactures reality.
Exactly. So he used this phenomenon called the autokinetic effect. Have you heard of this?
Remind me how that works. It's an illusion, right?
Right. It's a fascinating perceptual illusion. Basically, if you place a person in a pitch black room and project a single tiny stationary pinpoint of light onto the wall, the human eye will eventually perceive that light as moving.
Even though it's totally still.
Completely still.
Yeah.
Because there's no external frame of reference, so no horizon line, no furniture, literally just complete darkness, the natural micro movements of your own eye translate into the illusion of a moving light.
So your brain literally invents motion because it's starved of context. It's like it cannot handle the ambiguity of the void, so it just hallucinates a trajectory.
Precisely. It panics and makes something up. So Sharif brought subjects into this dark room one by one and asked them to estimate how far the light was moving. And because the movement was, an illusion, the estimates varied wildly.
Like all over the map.
Yeah. One person might say the light moved 2 inches. The next guy might say it darted across the wall by 2 feet. But over a series of trials alone in the room, each individual would eventually settle on their own personal baseline, right? A consistent internal norm.
Okay, but so far that just proves we're subjective creatures. We each build our own little version of reality when the lights go out.
Right. But Sharif didn't stop with isolated individuals. This is where it gets crazy. He changed the spatial dynamics. He then brought those exact same individuals back into the room, but this time in groups of 3. And he had them call out their estimates out loud. So you'd have one person whose previous internal norm was 2 inches sitting right next to a person whose norm was 2 feet.
Okay, so they're openly contradicting each other?
Exactly. And over the course of a few dozen trials, this highly predictable convergence occurred. The person seeing 2 inches would slowly revise their estimate upward. The person seeing 2 feet would revise theirs downward.
Just automatically.
Automatically. Without any instruction to collaborate and without any conscious realization that they were even altering their perception, the group would organically fuse their individual realities into a single shared group norm. They all started reporting that the light was moving about 6 inches.
That is deeply unsettling if you really pause to think about the implications there.
Yeah.
Because they aren't just compromising on an opinion, right? It's not like they're debating where to go for dinner. Their actual sensory perception, like what their optic nerve is literally communicating to their visual cortex, is being overwritten by the vocalized reality of the person sitting next to them.
Overwritten is the perfect word. And Sharif proved how deeply embedded this new reality was. He separated the groups, brought the subjects back into the darkroom individually again, and asked them to estimate the light's movement one more time.
And let me guess, they stuck with the group number.
They maintained the group norm. They did not revert back to their original baselines. The herd's reality had permanently rewired their individual perception of the physical world.
Wow. I mean, it makes complete evolutionary sense, though. If you zoom out to the Pleistocene epoch, the environment we actually evolved in, independent computation was incredibly dangerous.
Oh, a total liability.
Yeah. If you're standing on the savannah and 3 members of your tribe suddenly break into a dead sprint, you do not stand there and rationally evaluate the wind direction and the height of the grass and the statistical probability of a predator. You run.
You run first, ask questions later.
Exactly. The people who paused to independently compute the data, they were eaten. The people who blindly adopted the group norm survived to pass on their genetic code.
Yeah.
So we are, fundamentally, the descendants of the conformists.
We are. And that survival mechanism is the exact heuristic, the exact mental shortcut we carry into the modern commercial landscape. We use the behavior of others to navigate uncertainty.
Right.
But to see how that translates from, estimating a light in a dark room to actual commercial behavior, we have to bridge the gap from 1935 to the modern gold standard of social proof research. And that brings us to the work of Robert Cialdini.
Cialdini, right.
Yeah.
A total titan in the psychology of influence.
Mm-hmm.
And his work in the hospitality sector is, well, the towel experiment is arguably the most famous behavioral economics study of the last 30 years.
Easily.
And what's brilliant about it is how totally mundane the setting is. Like, we're moving from pitch-black laboratories to a standard American hotel room.
Everyone has seen that.
Every single time you walk into a hotel bathroom, you see that little card resting on the towel rack. It usually has, a graphic of a green leaf or a water droplet, and it outlines this very rational, logical argument about the environmental cost of washing linens every single day.
Save the planet, save water. Right.
Right? And Cialdini actually managed to persuade a major hotel chain to let him weaponize those little cards.
He really did. He essentially turned the hotel into this massive live-action behavioral laboratory because Cialdini wanted to test the efficacy of different persuasive frameworks. So he established a baseline by tracking the success of the standard industry message.
The control group.
Right. Message 1, the control. It relied on an appeal to environmental preservation. It asked guests to reuse their towels to help save the environment, citing the conservation of water and energy. This is purely rational, ethical appeal. And it worked to a moderate degree. The compliance rate was 35%.
Okay, so a 35% success rate. That gives us a really clear empirical baseline for the quote-unquote rational actor model. Roughly a third of people will engage in a minor inconvenience if you provide them with a logical, altruistic reason.
Exactly.
But Cialdini hypothesized that appealing to our altruism was fundamentally weaker than appealing to our tribalism, right?
Yes, so he introduced the second message. And he completely stripped away any mention of the environment or water conservation or global good. The card simply relied on social proof. All it stated was, most people reuse their towels.
Just most people.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly stark shift because you are removing the reason entirely. There's no logical argument presented for why you should reuse the towel, only the statistical assertion that the herd is already doing it.
And that single shift in copy boosted the compliance rate to 44%.
Wow. And a jump from 35% to 44% might sound to some people like an incremental bump, but in the context of behavioral change at scale, a 26% relative uplift is structurally massive. And the capital expenditure required to achieve that 26% uplift was exactly zero. It was simply the cost of arranging the ink differently on the cardboard.
Literally just changing words.
Right. And we have to look at whether the environmental guilt narrative was actively alienating people, or if the herd narrative just bypassed their rational filter entirely. Because, I mean, when I read Help Save the Environment, my brain engages its critical faculties. I start analyzing the claim. I might think, well, the hotel just wants to save money on laundry. They don't actually care about the planet. My defenses immediately go up.
You get skeptical.
Yeah. But when the card says most people do this, my brain doesn't engage in a critical debate about the ethics of the hotel. It simply registers a social norm and prompts me to conform to it so I don't feel like a deviant.
You're touching on something really important, the reduction of cognitive friction. The rational argument requires mental energy to process and validate. The social proof argument provides a heuristic shortcut. It just outsources the decision to the invisible majority. But Cialdini uncovered a third layer to this, which reveals the true nuance of how social proof operates. Because general social proof is powerful, but tailored social proof is explosive.
Okay, tailored how?
He deployed a third message across another set of rooms, and this message read, most people in this room reuse their towels.
In this room. And this is where the data gets wild, right? Because compliance jumped to 49%.
Yep.
That is a 40% relative uplift compared to the original rational control message. But conceptually, the phrase, in this room, is bizarre.
It's completely weird if you think about it.
Right. If you pause and think about it objectively, the behavior of the person who slept in that specific bed 3 days ago has absolute no rational bearing on whether you should hang up your towel. You don't know them, you will never meet them. There's zero logical connection between you and the previous occupant. So why does that specific spatial constraint trigger such a disproportionate spike in conformity?
It really comes down to the architecture of identity and relevance. We don't just follow any herd blindly. We look for the herd that most closely resembles us or shares our specific context. When a card says most people, the brain conjures a vague, abstract mass of humanity. But when the card says most people in this room, it triggers a really powerful sense of spatial identity. It acts as a proxy for shared circumstances.
Like we're in the same boat.
Exactly. The subconscious logic dictates that whoever stayed in this room likely shares a similar socioeconomic bracket. They are traveling for similar reasons, they are experiencing the exact same local weather conditions, and they're navigating the exact same physical space.
That's fascinating.
The physical boundaries of the room create a temporary, highly relevant in-group. And the more tightly you combine the social proof to the specific identity or context of the individual making the decision, the more potent the magnetic pole of conformity becomes.
It's just a brilliantly constructed experiment. But if I'm looking at this from the perspective of an entrepreneur or a business operator listening to this, a lingering question remains. If this mechanism is so deeply embedded in our psychology and so absurdly cheap to execute, like you said, just changing the ink, why did the hotel industry default to the environmental message in the first place?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question.
Why do we instinctively reach for the logical argument when the behavioral argument is objectively superior? To me, it feels like the environmental message is the equivalent of telling your child to eat your vegetables.
Yes.
It's what we think people should do. It's the noble, elevated, rational thing.
Yeah.
But the social proof message, most people do this. That's like saying, hey, eat the cake that everyone else in the party is already eating. It appeals to what we actually want to do, which is fit in and avoid social isolation.
We default to the eat your vegetables messaging because of how we view our own customers. Marketers, founders, executives, they inherently want to believe that their audience is sophisticated.
Right.
We design communication for a theoretical Homo economicus, a purely logical entity that calculates utility, environmental impact, and long-term consequences.
The perfectly rational human, which doesn't exist.
Exactly. We write copy that appeals to the highest rational nature of the consumer, and we entirely ignore the reality that underneath the veneer of modern civilization, they are operating on the exact same tribal heuristics that kept Muzaffar Sharif's subjects conforming in the dark. We design for the consumer we want rather than communicating with the primate that actually exists.
Okay, so the hotel towel experiment establishes the sheer power of the heuristic. But hanging up a towel is a free decision. It costs the guest nothing but a few calories of physical effort. I'd imagine the threshold for social proof completely changes when you ask someone to actually open their wallet.
Well,
Because if we move from the low-stakes environment of a hotel bathroom to the ruthless high-stakes environment of retail, where you're asking a consumer to part with hard-earned currency in a saturated market, does the eat-the-cake popularity metric still overpower the eat-your-vegetables rational metric?
the stakes absolutely change, but the reliance on the heuristic does not. In fact, it actually intensifies. As the environment becomes more saturated and the decisions become more frequent, our reliance on social proof actually deepens.
Really?
Yes. To bridge this from free actions to hard financial transactions, we look at the experiments orchestrated by Richard Shotton. He's a practitioner who rigorously tests these behavioral biases in commercial settings. And Shotton wanted to isolate the financial impact of social proof in a market defined by overwhelming choice and subjective taste. He chose the beer market.
Which is brilliant. The modern alcohol market is the perfect testing ground. A consumer walking into a pub or a liquor store is just assaulted by thousands of SKUs, intricate label designs, and competing brand narratives.
Exactly. Shotton engineered two distinct experiments to prove this. The first was a controlled presentation. He presented a cohort of consumers with a completely fabricated brand of South African beer, supposedly launching in the UK market.
Okay, a fake beer.
Right. He split the consumers into two groups. Group A was presented with a narrative built entirely on rational specifications. They were told about the origin of the hops, the purity of the water, the meticulous brewing process. It was the ultimate eat your vegetables pitch, pure empirical product data.
Which is, honestly, the exact playbook 90% of craft breweries use today.
Yeah.
They assume the consumer makes a purchasing decision based on the malt bill.
Right, but for Group B, Shotton kept the exact same rational narrative about the ingredients, but he bolted one crucial piece of information onto the end. He casually informed them that this was South Africa's most popular beer.
Oh, wow.
The data from the response was stark. Group B, the cohort exposed to the social proof, was twice as likely to express an intent to purchase and try the beer compared to Group A.
Wait, twice as likely. A 100% increase in purchase intent simply by appending the illusion of mass adoption. But intent is one thing, right? People are very generous with hypothetical money in a survey. Did Shotton test this where actual currency was changing hands?
He did, because he understood the vulnerability of intent data.
Wow.
So he moved the experiment into a live, uncontrolled commercial environment. He partnered with the Canopy Brewery and executed a real-world trial in a really busy South London bar.
Okay.
The methodology was intentionally rudimentary to isolate the variable. The bar had multiple beers on tap. For the intervention, they simply placed a small physical sign on the bar right next to the tap for the brewery's porter. And the sign made a singular claim. It declared the porter to be this week's best-selling ale.
That's it.
Yeah.
No tasty notes, no deep dive into the roasted chocolate malts.
Nothing.
Just a literal piece of cardboard stating its rank in the hierarchy of the herd.
Just a piece of cardboard. And the behavioral shift was violent. Sales for that specific porter increased by a factor of 2.5 compared to the baseline of an average week.
That is absurd.
And to ensure the data was rigorous, Shotton adjusted the numbers to account for the natural weekly fluctuations in the bar's overall foot traffic and total volume sold. Even after those adjustments, the sign was responsible for an absolute doubling of the proportion of porter sales. A piece of cardboard doubled the product's market share in real time.
Wow. We really have to unpack the cognitive sequence happening at the bar because it perfectly illustrates why choice overload makes us so vulnerable to this bias.
Oh, totally.
Imagine walking into that South London pub on a Friday night. It's loud, it's crowded, you've had a long week, and you finally reach the front of the queue. The bartender is staring at you, waiting. You look at the taps, and there are 15 different options. You've got hazy IPAs, milk stouts, crisp lagers, porters.
Too many choices.
Right. To make a fully rational decision, you would need to ask the bartender for 15 different samples, evaluate the flavor profile of each against your current palate preferences, calculate the alcohol by volume to price ratio for maximum economic utility, and then place your order.
Which nobody does.
Nobody does that.
Yeah.
That process requires massive cognitive load. Your brain literally does not have the glucose or the time to run that algorithm, so it panics and it searches for a heuristic. It needs a shortcut to bypass the computation.
And the sign on the bar offers the ultimate cognitive bailout. It provides the wisdom of the crowd. The subconscious dialogue is instantaneous. If enough people in this pub ordered this porter to make it the best seller, it must taste good. I will trust their collective palate to save myself the effort of evaluating it myself.
It is an outsourcing of risk.
Yeah.
If you choose a random beer and it tastes terrible, you bear the total burden of a poor decision. But if you choose the best seller and it tastes terrible, you're at least failing conventionally alongside the majority.
Exactly. Failing conventionally.
That concept, outsourcing risk and failing conventionally, is profound.
Right.
It dictates so much of corporate behavior, too. Like the old saying, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM. You buy the market leader because the social proof insulates you from criticism. But this brings us to a massive, glaring paradox that we have to confront here. If Shotton can double a brewery's market share with a Sharpie and a piece of cardboard, and if Cialdini can radically alter human behavior with a tailored sentence on a hotel card, why is this not the default operating system of global commerce?
Yeah, you'd think it would be.
Right. If this bias is so universally potent, why aren't Fortune 500 companies, startups, and agencies plastering social proof across every single touchpoint? Why do brands spend millions on these avant-garde branding campaigns while leaving this incredibly cheap, empirically proven tactic on the table?
That paradox is the result of a fatal flaw that infects the entire architecture of modern business. The catastrophic over-reliance on market research.
Okay, say more about that.
The reason businesses do not use social proof is because they ask their consumers what they want, and the consumers systematically lie to them.
Wait, lie maliciously or lie subconsciously?
Subconsciously, primarily. There's a massive systemic disconnect between what influences human behavior and what humans believe influences their behavior.
That makes sense.
To understand the depth of this self-deception, we can look back at Cialdini's hotel research. Because after he gathered the hard data from the actual hotel rooms, proving that the tailored social proof message absolutely dominated the rational environmental message, he ran a parallel study.
A survey?
Right. He gathered a cohort of students, showed them the 3 different towel messages, and asked them a very straightforward question. Which of these messages would be most persuasive in getting you to reuse your towel?
Let me guess. They looked at the messages, completely ignored the reality of their own behavioral patterns, and chose the option that made them look like upstanding citizens.
They overwhelmingly chose the environmental message. When asked to predict their own behavior, they confidently asserted that the rational, eco-friendly argument would be the primary driver of their compliance. They actively denied that the social proof message would work on them. The survey data generated the exact inverse of the empirical reality.
It's the focus group mirror. When you put a human being in a focus group, or you hand them a survey, you are no longer observing a consumer. You are observing an actor performing the role of a hyper-rational, fiercely independent individual.
Performing is the perfect way to describe it.
Because if you ask a guy why he just spent $90,000 on a luxury SUV, he's going to look you dead in the eye and recite the marketing brochure. He'll talk about the torque, the superior German engineering, the advanced safety ratings for his hypothetical children, and the resale value. He will spend 35 minutes outlining a flawless economic justification.
He's got all his talking points.
Right. What he will never, ever say is, I bought it because the guy next door bought a Mercedes last month, and I felt a deep, primal pang of status anxiety, and I needed a visible totem of wealth to reestablish my position in the neighborhood hierarchy.
No, he will never say it because his ego will not permit him to acknowledge it. We have a fundamental psychological need to view our decisions as autonomous and rationally derived. Admitting that we are heavily influenced by the herd feels like admitting a weakness or a lack of character or some deficit of intellect.
Feels cheap.
Exactly. As the legendary advertising executive David Ogilvy observed over half a century ago, Consumers don't think how they feel, say what they think, or do what they say.
Consumers don't think how they feel, say what they think, or do what they say.
Hmm.
I mean, if that quote is true, and a century of behavioral science suggests it is, then the entire multi-billion-dollar market research industry is essentially built on sand.
Completely.
Businesses send out thousands of surveys, they host focus groups behind two-way mirrors, they ask people what they want, and they build their entire product roadmap and marketing strategy around those answers. And because no one in a focus group will ever admit to being swayed by a bestseller sign, the brand assumes social proof is ineffective and just discards it.
They optimize their business for a rational consumer that simply does not exist.
Wow.
If you want to truly understand and influence behavior, you have to abandon the sociology of self-reporting and embrace anthropology. You have to observe the organism in the wild. As the strategist Mark Earls brilliantly articulated, you have to focus on the space between people, not the space between their ears.
The space between people, the social dynamics, the unspoken cues, the sideways glances to see what the rest of the tribe is doing.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so the imperative for anyone listening is to stop trusting what your audience says they want and start analyzing the behavioral data of what they actually do. And once you realize that they are looking to the herd for direction, you have to actively provide that direction.
Exactly. You have to lead them.
So how do we operationalize this? We know it works. We know surveys obscure its effectiveness. How do the smartest brands, the ones who actually ignore the focus groups, actually deploy social proof in their copy and their strategy?
Well, the most direct and blunt tactic is the explicit assumption of scale. If you have the volume, you do not imply it. You aggressively state it. You make the sheer mass of your popularity the central pillar of your communication.
Give me an example.
We see this with some of the most iconic, enduring campaigns in commercial history. When McDonald's updates the signs under the golden arches to read "billions and billions served," they are not making a qualitative claim. They're not arguing that their beef is superior or their culinary technique is refined.
Not at all.
They are deploying a pure, unadulterated metric of scale. The message is, the entire planet has outsourced their caloric decision-making to us, and you should too.
It's the ultimate heuristic bailout. You see billions served, and your brain immediately says, well, it might not be a Michelin star meal, but it certainly won't kill me because it hasn't killed the 3 billion people in front of me.
Exactly. Or look at the FMCG space, specifically the long-running UK campaign for Whiskas cat food. For years, their core claim was 8 out of 10 owners said their cats prefer it. They didn't lead with the nutritional breakdown or the protein sourcing. They led with a statistical consensus. They explicitly provided the social proof metric so the consumer didn't have to guess.
But we established earlier, with Cialdini's in this room, towel data, that raw, general scale isn't always the most potent lever, right? Broad scale works, but tailored scale, rooted in a specific identity, is exponentially more powerful. How does that translation of spatial identity work when you are trying to sell a product rather than save a towel?
Tailoring scale to identity is where social proof moves from a blunt instrument to a precision tool. Consider Costa Coffee, which is the dominant coffee chain in the UK. When they were formulating a major advertising campaign, they had the scale to make a broad claim. They could have easily stated, the UK's favorite coffee, or millions of people prefer Costa. That would have been general social proof.
Why?
Instead, they narrowed the aperture. Their campaign claimed popularity specifically among coffee lovers.
That is a subtle but structurally massive distinction. Because most people includes everyone, people who drink instant coffee, people who hate coffee, people who just don't care. But coffee lovers taps directly into a self-identified in-group.
Yes. By specifying coffee lovers, the message resonates on an identity level. If you view yourself as a connoisseur, someone who appreciates a good roast, you don't care what the general herd does. You care what your specific herd does. The ad establishes that the educated, discerning tribe has chosen Costa.
And what were the results?
The financial result of that tailored approach was a 5.5% increase in like-for-like sales. In a saturated, highly competitive, mature market like high street coffee, a 5.5% bump driven by a minor shift in copywriting is an astronomical victory.
But wait, Costa is the biggest chain in the UK. McDonald's is a global titan. There's a question here about the necessity of stating the obvious. If a brand is already the undisputed market leader, doesn't the public just intuitively know that? It feels almost redundant for a giant corporation to spend ad dollars telling people they're a giant corporation. Do they really need to keep repeating it?
This is one of the most dangerous traps for founders and executives, and it's something behavioral scientists refer to as the Carling blind spot.
The Carlin blind spot, okay.
Brands suffer deeply from the curse of knowledge. Imagine you are the marketing director for a major product. You spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week staring at market share data, competitor analysis, and sales dashboards. You are swimming in the reality of your own scale.
You're obsessed with it.
Right. And because that reality is so self-evident to you, you project that awareness onto the general public. You falsely assume that your dominance is common knowledge.
It's the bubble of corporate narcissism. You assume everyone thinks about your brand as much as you do.
But they don't. The general public gives your brand roughly 0 seconds of conscious thought per week.
Sad but true.
To empirically prove this disconnect, researchers surveyed over 1,000 consumers regarding brand leadership across several categories, including draft lager. Now, in the UK, Carling is the undisputed objective market leader. It is Britain's best-selling pub pint. If you look at the raw data, no one else is even close.
Okay.
But when the researchers asked the public to identify the most popular lager, only 24% of the respondents correctly identified Carling.
24%. That is staggering. Barely a quarter of the population knew the objective reality of the market. Over 75% of consumers were entirely blind to the fact that Carling was the default choice of the herd.
Which means Carling was sitting on a massive reservoir of social proof that they were completely failing to utilize simply because they assumed the public already knew. The strategic takeaway is absolute. If you're popular, you can never, ever assume your target audience knows it. You have to relentlessly broadcast your scale. And taking a page from the Costa Coffee playbook, you should ideally tailor that scale to the context of the medium.
Give me a real-world application of that.
Say you are a B2B software company and you are running a print ad in the Wall Street Journal. You don't say the world's favorite software. You say the preferred platform of Wall Street Journal readers. You map the scale directly onto the identity of the person holding the newspaper.
I am tracking with all of this. The psychology is sound, the data is undeniable. But I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate because there is a glaring, massive issue for a large portion of our listeners.
Let's hear it.
This playbook is phenomenal if you are McDonald's or Whiskas or Carling. It is very easy to aggressively broadcast your scale when you have literally sold billions of units. But what if you're a startup? What if you're an entrepreneur who launched your products 6 months ago? What if you are definitively, objectively not the market leader? You can't put a sign on the bar saying bestseller if you've only moved 3 units this week. That's just fraud. Does the social proof heuristic simply not apply to the underdogs? Are new entrants just locked out of this psychological lever entirely?
That is the most frequent and honestly the most valid pushback against the application of social proof. But it stems from a rigid definition of scale.
How so?
The beauty of this bias is that human brains are not meticulously auditing your data. You do not need to be the #1 global titan to trigger the herd heuristic. You just need creative framing. You need to find the specific dimensional axis where you do have momentum, or you need to use wit to manufacture the perception of leadership.
Creative framing. Break that down for me. How do you frame small numbers to look like a herd?
You find the specific metric, or the narrow subcategory, where you possess undeniable density. You might not be the highest grossing company in the world, but perhaps you are the fastest growing in your sector.
Oh, I see.
Growth rate is a powerful form of dynamic social proof. It implies that the herd is currently migrating in your direction. Or perhaps you are the highest rated product in a highly specific geographic zip code.
Right.
Consider Tunnex, the Scottish confectionery brand. They don't have the global footprint of a Mars or a Hershey. They can't claim billions served. But on their wrappers, they prominently print 5 million sold weekly.
5 million sold weekly.
5 million is a massive, tangible number when a consumer is holding a single chocolate biscuit. It frames their success in a temporal window weekly that makes the volume sound overwhelmingly dense.
So you constrain the context until you find a massive number that is factually true, and you highlight that specific truth.
Yes. Or, alternatively, you bypass the raw numbers entirely and use humor and wit to frame your position, disarming the consumer's rational defenses while implying dominance.
Okay, wait, how does wit manufacture dominance?
There is a legendary piece of advertising from the 1970s crafted by the executive Jeremy Bullmore. He was working on a campaign for a Ford convertible. Now, Ford wanted to lean into the car's popularity. The standard, unimaginative corporate approach would be a headline reading, Britain's best-selling convertible.
Which is boring and visible copy that washes right over the consumer.
Exactly. Instead, Bullmore ran a large visual of a baby carriage, a classic traditional pram with the hood pulled back, and the headline beneath the pram read, "The only convertible that outsells Ford."
Oh, that is absolute brilliant copy.
It is a masterclass in framing. By engaging the audience with a joke, you force them to solve a tiny cognitive puzzle. When they get the joke that a baby carriage is technically a convertible, they feel a small spike of dopamine. They feel clever.
Right, they're in on it.
But while they are enjoying the joke, the underlying premise is smuggled past their critical faculties. Ford is the undisputed king of actual motor vehicles. It uses wit to assert dominance without triggering the skepticism that usually greets corporate boasting.
Okay, so if you have some numbers, you frame them dynamically, like tonics. And if you have a great copywriter, you use wit to state your position, like Ford. But let's push this to the absolute extreme. What if you literally have zero numbers? What if you launched yesterday? You have no sales data, no growth rate, and no market share. How do you leverage the herd when you don't even have a herd yet?
When you lack the empirical data of scale, you must architect the illusion of popularity. You have to design the product or the delivery of the service so that its consumption is violently visible to bystanders. You relied on the principle that visibility mimics density.
Visibility mimics density. So if a few people are doing it very loudly, it feels like everyone is doing it. How do you build that into a product?
The most profound historical execution of this principle was the launch of the Apple iPod in 2001. To understand why it was genius, you have to look at the technological landscape Apple was entering. Before the iPod, the portable music market was dominated by Sony Walkmans, Discmans, and early, clunky MP3 players.
Right, those weird little silver blocks.
Yeah. And all of those competitors used standard, utilitarian, black wires and black earphones. When a consumer bought a competitor's device, they would turn it on, put the earphones in, and drop the player into their jacket pocket. The black wires would instantly camouflage against their clothing.
Ah, so the consumption was entirely invisible. You could be standing in a subway car with 40 people, and 30 of them could be listening to a Sony, but because the black wires blended in, you had no visual data that Sony was dominating that space.
Exactly. Their market share was effectively hidden from the herd. Apple understood that to break into the market, they didn't just need a better interface. They needed their users to become walking billboards. So they made a deliberate, radical design choice. They manufactured the earbuds and the connecting cables in stark, glossy, bright white.
It's the peacock feather strategy. In evolutionary biology, a peacock's massive, colorful tail feathers provide absolutely zero survival utility. In fact, they make the bird slower, heavier, and vastly more visible to predators. But they serve a singular, vital purpose. They are a hyper-visible signal to every other bird in the forest. The feathers scream, "I am strong, I am healthy, I have resources."
That's a great analogy. Apple's white earbuds were technological peacock feathers. They didn't make the audio sound any better than black wires would have, but they ensured that the utility of the device was broadcast to every single person in a 50-foot radius.
Because it just pops.
It transformed private consumption into a public broadcast. Suddenly, you would walk down a street in New York or London, and you would see these stark white wires contrasting against dark coats. Because the white was so distinctive and eye-catching, you noticed it every single time. Even when Apple's actual market share was still tiny in the early months of the launch, their visible market share felt omnipresent. The brain conflated visibility with popularity. It created a powerful illusion that everyone is buying an iPod, which in turn triggered the social proof heuristic, accelerating actual sales until the illusion became the reality.
Guy Kawasaki, who was one of Apple's original evangelists, has a great philosophy on this. He says, familiarity breeds commitment. The more you see a specific behavior modeled in your environment, the more normal it becomes, and the more likely you are to adopt it. But it's not just tech hardware that can pull this off, right? You can engineer visibility in almost any physical industry.
Oh, definitely. Look at the beverage sector. When Magner's Irish Cider decided to aggressively expand into the UK market, they faced a massive uphill battle. Cider was traditionally viewed as a cheap, unrefined drink, usually served in cans or generic glassware.
Not exactly a premium product.
Right. And Magner's completely inverted that perception by mandating a highly specific, highly visible consumption ritual. They were the first major brand to insist that their cider be served in pubs over a massive glass of ice in a proprietary, distinctly branded pint glass.
Why does the ice in the specific glass matter so much?
Because of the environment of a crowded pub. Normally, someone orders a generic bottled beer, the bartender pours it into a blank glass, throws the bottle in the bin, and the consumer walks back to their table. To everyone else in the pub, they are just holding a glass of amber liquid. The brand identity is erased the moment it leaves the bar.
So true.
But Magner's engineered a spectacle. The bartender takes a distinct glass, fills it to the brim with ice, which was highly unusual for cider at the time, and pours the bottle. The ice clinking, the condensation on the glass, the specific shape of the vessel, it created a visually arresting object.
You literally couldn't miss it.
Right. When a consumer walked back through the crowded pub holding that specific icy pint, it was unmissable. Other patrons immediately noticed it. What is that person drinking? Why is there ice in it? And when they saw 3 or 4 people holding the same distinct glass, the social proof kicked in. It created the immediate perception that Magner's was the undisputed premium drink of the summer, driving massive trial and adoption simply by making the consumption visibly distinct.
That is the ultimate strategic unlock for the startup or the underdog. Your marketing strategy isn't just about what you write on your landing page or what you run in your ad copy. It is about deeply integrating public visibility into the actual usage of your product. You want your early adopters to inadvertently advertise for you just by existing in public with your offering. Okay, let's step back and survey the landscape we've covered. The data is incredibly robust. From Sharif's optical illusions in 1935, to Cialdini's hotel towels, to Shotton's bar experiments, to Apple's earbuds, the mechanics of social proof are empirically proven. They are astonishingly cheap to implement, often requiring nothing more than a change in copywriting or packaging color. And even if you aren't the market leader, you can creatively frame your numbers or engineer the illusion of scale.
Right.
The evidence is overwhelming, which leaves us with one final baffling question. If it is this proven, this cheap, and this effective, what is the final barrier? Why isn't every single agency, marketer, and entrepreneur utilizing social proof as the foundation of every campaign? What psychological block is stopping them from pulling this lever?
The ultimate barrier has nothing to do with budgets or data or market conditions. It comes down to one of the most destructive silent forces in the corporate world: professional pride. Precisely. The ego of the creator, the marketer, and the executive. Think about the psychology of someone who has spent years studying marketing, who holds a degree in business, or who considers themselves a sophisticated behavioral strategist. Applying social proof feels brutally simple. It feels basic.
Yeah, it's not sexy.
If your job is to create a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, walking into the boardroom and saying, let's just put a sign up that says lots of people buy this, does not stroke your professional ego. It doesn't make you look like a visionary.
Right, you want to win a Cannes Lion for your avant-garde, metaphorical, deeply emotional cinematic universe. You want your peers to praise your genius. You don't want to just deploy a blunt psychological heuristic that anyone could write on a napkin.
And that is a fatal business error. Elevating professional pride over empirical effectiveness is a dereliction of duty to the business you are trying to grow. Our professional egos are naturally piqued by complexity. We assume that a complex market requires a complex strategy, but human behavior is fundamentally driven by simplicity. We are looking for shortcuts to avoid cognitive load.
Wow.
When you bow to your own ego, when you prioritize a clever, complex campaign over a simple, proven social proof trigger, you are elevating your own vanity above the commercial interests of the company.
It is the ultimate battle between vanity metrics and reality metrics.
Yeah.
You might feel like an absolute genius for crafting a labyrinthine, hyper-rational argument about your product's specifications. But if that argument doesn't move the needle as effectively as a bright yellow sign that reads 5 million sold, you have failed at the core objective of your job.
The ultimate goal of any commercial endeavor is effectiveness, not complexity. If you want to drive massive, sustainable growth, you must be willing to subjugate your ego. You must be willing to leverage these simple, proven, ancient psychological triggers, even if they feel too basic for your professional aesthetic. You have to get out of your own way and let the behavioral science do the heavy lifting.
So if we pull the lens all the way back, what is the grand synthesis of everything we've unpacked today?
The soul of this entire concept, from Sharif's dark rooms to the bustling South London pubs, is a humbling recognition of our own nature. We are fundamentally and inescapably social animals. We are navigating a modern world that is overwhelmingly, paralyzingly complex. Every single day, we face thousands of micro-decisions: what software stack to integrate, what coffee to drink, what investment to make. The human brain cannot rationally compute every variable.
Of course not.
Therefore, social proof is not just a marketing trick, it is the brain's ultimate survival heuristic. It is how we navigate chaos. By aggressively making your product's popularity visible, by intricately tailoring that popularity to the specific identities of your audience, and by ruthlessly excising your own professional pride from the equation, you stop fighting against the current. You align your business with the deep, unchanging grain of human nature.
I love that framing. We aren't logical machines processing data. We are a herd constantly scanning the horizon for cues. And if you have the courage to clearly provide that cue, you guide the herd. But here is where the behavioral science gets truly dangerous. We've spent this entire deep dive looking at how to use social proof to build momentum. What happens when you use it incorrectly?
Oh, it's a disaster.
Right. What happens when you try to highlight a massive problem to raise awareness and you accidentally trigger a psychological landmine that destroys your own cause? Join us on the next deep dive where we explore the dark mirror of today's topic, negative social proof. We're going to discover why telling the public about a widespread crisis might actually be the exact trigger that makes that crisis infinitely worse.
It's a fascinating one.
We'll examine the stolen, petrified wood of Arizona, the millions lost in Wikipedia donations, and the fatal, well-intentioned mistake that charities make every single day. Until then, think about the next time you're driving to the station and you see someone staring up into the branches of a tree. Before your foot hits the brake, before you tilt your head back, ask yourself a very uncomfortable question. Are you deciding to look, or is the crowd deciding for you? Thank you for taking the deep dive with us. See you next time.
Imagine you're standing in the middle of a massive problem, like a literal crime wave is sweeping through your community or maybe your business, and you are just entirely exasperated.
Okay, you're at your wit's end at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You decide you have to do something about it.
Right.
So you want to appeal to people's better nature, right? You put up this highly visible sign warning everyone about just how widespread this theft has become. You want them to look at the sign, realize the sheer scale of the damage being done, and, feel a deep sense of shame. You're hoping that highlighting the severity of the crisis will just shock them into stopping.
Which makes total logical sense from the outside.
Right. But here is the terrifying part. A month goes by, you check the numbers, and instead of preventing the crime, your well-meaning sign actually doubled the theft rate.
Wow.
You didn't just fail to stop the bleeding, you actively poured gasoline on the fire. How does a completely well-intentioned warning turn into, like, a literal crime promotion strategy?
It's actually one of the most counterintuitive outcomes in behavioral psychology. And it happens because we fundamentally misunderstand how the human brain processes social information.
How so?
Well, when we see a sign complaining about how many people are doing something wrong, we don't process the complaint. We process the numbers. We look at it and our brain says, oh, everyone else is doing this. It must be normal.
That is just, it's so wild. And that neurological blind spot is the core paradox of negative social proof, which is exactly the phenomenon we are unpacking today.
Yes, it's a huge trap.
We're doing a deep dive into Richard Shotton's book, The Choice Factory, specifically focusing on how highlighting the massive scale of a problem inadvertently encourages people to contribute to it.
And this is a trap that, the world's biggest brands, charities, and governments fall into constantly.
Totally. For anyone listening who is trying to change behavior, whether you're an entrepreneur writing sales copy, a manager drafting an internal memo, or just someone trying to convince people to support a cause mastering this concept is vital. It's literally the difference between driving the behavior you want and accidentally sabotaging your entire mission.
I mean, we really can't grasp the danger of negative social proof until we understand the baseline mechanism of just plain old social proof. Let's look at this from like an evolutionary perspective.
Okay, take me back to the savannah.
Right. At our core, humans are profoundly social animals, and I mean that in a very literal, survival-oriented sense. We evolved in environments where doing what the group did was the safest bet.
Because standing out was dangerous.
Exactly. If you were a hominid on the Pleistocene savanna and you saw 3 of your peers suddenly running in the opposite direction, you didn't, stop to logically analyze the situation.
You didn't pull out a pros and cons list?
No, you didn't weigh the pros and cons of running, you just ran. Because the people who stopped to think usually got eaten.
So mimicry is literally a survival mechanism. It's a heuristic.
Precisely. We simply do not have the cognitive energy or the time to laboriously weigh every single decision we make throughout the day.
from what we buy to where we eat to how we behave in a public park.
Right. So to conserve energy, we rely on shortcuts. And one of the most powerful shortcuts in the human brain is simply looking around and unthinkingly mimicking the behavior of the herd.
If everyone else is doing it, our brain implicitly assumes it must be the correct or at least safe thing to do.
Yep. That's social proof in a nutshell.
Let me try to map this onto a modern digital environment because I think it exposes where this instinct really starts to backfire.
Go for it.
So you're sitting on a train, scrolling through your phone, reading an article on The Guardian. An ad pops up. It's a plea for financial support. And it reads, more people are reading The Guardian than ever, but fewer are paying for it.
Classic example.
Now, if I'm looking at that strictly through a lens of a marketer trying to be authentic, that sounds incredibly honest. It's vulnerable. They are laying their business model bare and asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
But based on this evolutionary mimicking bias you just mentioned, what is actually happening in the reader's brain when they see that?
It completely backfires. The ad thinks it's communicating urgency, right? Like a desperate need for funding. But because of our hardwired mimicking bias, what your brain actually parses is a description of a social norm.
Oh, wow.
You don't read it as a plea for help. You read it as, most people are reading this for free.
Because we are those same social animals looking to the herd for cues.
Exactly. You subconsciously think, well, if nobody else is paying for it, why should I be the one sucker who does?
I'm just absorbing that because it completely flips conventional wisdom on its head. You think you're throwing a lifeline to your business, but you are effectively validating the exact behavior you want to stop.
You're giving them psychological permission.
Yes. When you tell people that a bad behavior is widespread, you accidentally normalize it. You remove all the social friction.
You're telling them that freeloading is the dominant culture of your platform, and people naturally want to align with the dominant culture.
That is a fascinating, almost terrifying realization for anyone writing copy. If you highlight the deviance, you make deviance the norm.
Which brings up a story from the text that I think is the ultimate real-world manifestation of this trap.
Yes, I want to spend some time on the petrified forest experiment because the data here is just astounding.
It's such a classic study in behavioral science. To really understand the sheer danger of negative social proof, we have to look at this 2003 experiment.
Who ran it?
It was conducted by 3 prominent psychologists, Robert Cialdini, Steve Martin, and Noah Goldstein. The setting was the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona.
And for those who don't know, the park is famous for these massive, brilliantly colored logs of petrified wood. Wood that has essentially turned to solid quartz over millions of years.
It's beautiful, and it's a completely finite resource.
Right. It's not like a forest that regrows. Once a piece of petrified wood is gone, it's gone for the rest of human history.
Exactly. And at the time of this study, the park was facing an absolute existential crisis. They were losing an astonishing 14 tons of petrified wood every single year.
14 tons. And we should clarify how that happens. It wasn't like organized crime syndicates rolling in with dump trucks in the middle of the night.
No, not at all. It's the tragedy of the commons. It was mostly happening a tiny piece at a time.
Like the family from the suburbs on a road trip, and a kid slips a rock the size of a golf ball into his pocket as a souvenir.
Or a hiker takes a small sliver for their garden. It feels victimless in the moment.
But the cumulative effect of those tiny, seemingly insignificant thefts was devastating. It was making the Petrified Forest one of America's 10 most endangered national parks.
So the park rangers, desperate to stop this bleeding, reacted the way almost any rational person would. They put up warning signs emphasizing the sheer scale of the theft.
Which makes sense.
They wanted to communicate the 14-ton loss, hoping to shock visitors into compliance by showing them the massive damage being done.
It's the exact same instinct as the crime wave scenario we opened with. Look at this destruction, feel bad about it.
Exactly. But Robert Cialdini, who is essentially the godfather of influence and persuasion research, saw this and suspected it was backfiring.
He knew something was off.
Right. He and his team decided to scientifically test the effectiveness of this messaging. So they set up a field experiment. They went out to various paths in the park and deliberately placed marked pieces of petrified wood near the trails. Then they rotated different types of warning signs at these locations to see how the messaging impacted the rate of theft.
Okay, let's break down the 3 conditions they tested, because the spread of the results is what makes this so important.
Sure.
Condition 1 was the control. They placed absolutely no sign at all at this spot, just the marked wood in nature. And the result there was that 2.9% of the marked wood pieces were stolen by tourists passing by.
That is our baseline.
Right.
Then they introduced the second condition. Here, they used what behavioral scientists call a condemning or injunctive sign. The sign simply read, "Please don't remove the petrified wood from the park, changing the natural state of the petrified forest."
Notice the phrasing there. It didn't mention anyone else's behavior.
Exactly. It didn't mention the 14 tons. It just stated the rule and what you shouldn't do. The result was positive thefts dropped from the 2.9% baseline down to 1.7%.
Okay, so a simple, direct rule works. But condition 3 is the variable we really care about today. This is the negative social proof condition.
This is where it gets crazy.
The sign at this location actively emphasized the massive scale of the problem, similar to what the rangers were originally doing. It read, "Many past visitors have removed the petrified wood from the park, changing the natural state of the petrified forest."
And this is where the psychology turns dark. Remember, the baseline, with no sign at all, doing absolutely nothing, resulted in a 2.9% theft rate.
Yeah.
With this negative social proof sign, the thefts didn't drop. They didn't even stay the same. They skyrocketed to 7.9%.
Wow. I really need to pause and hammer this point home for you listening because the implications are so vast.
It's huge.
Having absolutely no sign at all, literally letting nature take its course without any intervention, was vastly superior to using negative social proof. The sign that was explicitly designed, funded, and printed to stop people from stealing actually caused thefts to rise to nearly 4 times the rate of the simple rule-based sign.
It is a stunning backfire. Cialdini himself concluded that the park's messaging wasn't a crime prevention strategy. It was functionally a crime promotion strategy.
It reminds me of a dynamic you see in education all the time. Imagine a teacher standing in front of a struggling classroom.
Okay.
The teacher is frustrated, so they yell, "Half of you are failing this course." Now, the teacher's intention is obvious. They are trying to create a sense of panic. They want the students to think, "Oh no, this is a crisis, I need to study harder."
Right, motivate through fear.
But what actually happens in the mind of a struggling student?
The student feels relief.
Exactly. The student realizes they aren't an outlier. It signals to them that failing is totally normal. It's the default state of the classroom.
Because if half the class is failing, then my failure is acceptable. I don't need to feel ashamed because I have plenty of company.
That analogy captures the exact mechanism perfectly. When the park rangers highlighted the 14 tons of stolen wood, the sign essentially whispered to the tourists, "Hey, everyone else is taking a piece of the park? It's practically a tradition."
You'd better grab your souvenir before it's all gone. By highlighting the sheer volume of the theft, they made the deviant behavior seem like the dominant behavior. And humans will naturally align with the dominant behavior.
So if you're digesting this, maybe you run a small business or you manage a team, what should you be looking for? It seems like this instinct to complain about bad behavior is so deeply ingrained in us that we probably do it without realizing it.
We absolutely do. And that's why Cialdini famously calls this the big mistake in everyday marketing. Despite these clear findings from over 2 decades ago, brilliant organizations constantly make this exact same error.
Why do you think that is? Why do incredibly smart people with vast resources keep falling for it?
Because the logic feels so sound from the inside. When you are deeply invested in a problem, whether it's saving a national park or saving a struggling business, the problem consumes you.
You're too close to it.
Exactly. You see the sheer scale of it, and you assume that if other people could just see the scale of it, they would care as much as you do. You think that by showing the daunting, scary statistics, you will shock people out of their apathy.
Let's look at some real-world examples of this big mistake outside of a national park, because the text highlights a rapid-fire list of blunders that are almost agonizing to read once you understand the psychology.
Let's do it.
We already touched on The Guardian, but let's look at Wikipedia. Every year, Wikipedia runs these massive fundraising drives with banners at the top of every article.
Oh, I've seen those.
And historically, they've often used copy that reads something like, "Only a tiny proportion of our readers give."
It's the exact same trap. Jimmy Wales, the founder, is looking at his server costs and thinking, if people just knew how few people actually pay for this immense resource, they'd realize we are on the brink of disaster, and they would donate.
But the psychological message received by the public is entirely different.
Completely different.
Right. When I read, "Only a tiny proportion of our readers give," my brain doesn't say, "I need to be the hero who steps up and saves Wikipedia."
What does it say?
My brain says, "Freeloading is the norm." The vast majority of people use this without paying, so I can too. I'm just acting like a normal internet user.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this a little bit. Wikipedia has to be honest, don't they? They pride themselves on transparency. If they lie and say everyone is donating, they lose their integrity. Are you saying transparency is bad for marketing?
No, no, that is a crucial distinction. We are absolutely not advocating for lying or manipulating the data. Transparency is vital, but framing matters.
Framing.
We will get to how to solve that specific bind in a moment, but first, let's look at how pervasive this framing error is, even in life or death scenarios. Consider the National Health Service in the UK, specifically their blood donation campaigns.
Oh man, this one is wild to me.
For a long time, the NHS heavily publicized the alarming statistic that only 4% of people donate blood.
1%.
Now, if you are a hospital administrator, that 4% figure is terrifying. It represents a critical, chronic shortage. Their intention in publicizing it was to emphasize how desperately they needed new donors.
But put yourself in the shoes of an average citizen walking past that poster. What is the psychological effect?
It's a diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah. If I see that only 4% of people donate, the message I internalize is almost no one donates blood. It is an extremely rare niche activity.
And therefore, you don't need to feel any personal guilt about not donating. You're in the 96% majority. You're normal.
Exactly. It completely neutralizes any social pressure to participate.
Right. David Halpern, who was the head of the UK government's behavioural insights team, often referred to as the nudge unit, pointed out several more everyday examples of this in the source material.
These are mundane situations where governments or businesses accidentally promote the behavior they hate. Let's walk through those because they are so relatable.
He observed posters warning immigration officers that some of their colleagues have been caught selling visas.
Right. The government thought, we need to show we are cracking down on corruption. We will put up posters showing that corrupt officers are getting caught.
But what does a junior officer think when they read that? They don't necessarily feel deterred.
What do they think?
They think, wow, other people in my department are doing this. I had no idea it was so common. I wonder how much money they made.
Oh, that's terrible.
It introduces the idea that corruption is a viable, relatively normal path within the organization.
Halpern also noted signs in doctors' waiting rooms. And I've literally seen these myself. A laminated sign at the reception desk complaining about the massive number of people who missed their appointments that month.
Like last month, 150 patients failed to show up for their appointments.
Yes. And again, the receptionist puts that up out of pure frustration. But the patient sitting in the waiting room reads it and thinks, oh, missing an appointment isn't a big deal. People do it all the time.
If I oversleep next week and miss my physical, I'm just a drop in the bucket. I'm clearly not the only one.
He even called out national campaigns complaining about the low number of women on corporate boards. This one is incredibly counterintuitive because the cause is so important.
It is important, but when activists or governments aggressively broadcast the statistic that, say, the average corporate board has a dismal percentage of female representation, they accidentally create a very low benchmark.
Ah, I see.
A company with a board of 12 might look at that dismal national average and say, well, we have one woman on our board, so compared to the terrible average we keep hearing about, we're actually doing pretty well.
It breeds complacency rather than urgency.
Exactly.
Okay, so this brings us to the operational question. If you are an entrepreneur or a charity organizer or a park ranger, and you genuinely have an emergency, you desperately need to convey urgency to your audience, how do you do it without falling into the negative social proof trap?
Right, because as we established with Wikipedia, you can't just pretend the problem doesn't exist, and you can't lie about the numbers.
This is where we introduce the first major strategic pivot for anyone looking to apply this science. You must flip the statistics.
Yes, you can explain the exact same mathematical reality, but you must frame it around the positive desired behavior.
Walk me through how that works practically. Let's go back to the petrified forest.
In the petrified forest, the negative frame was highlighting the deviance. Many past visitors have removed the petrified wood, resulting in 14 tons lost. To flip the stat, you take the exact same data set, but focus on the vast majority who are behaving well.
How would that sound?
You say, 97% of our visitors leave the petrified wood in the park, preserving it for future generations. Please join them.
That is brilliant. You aren't lying. You are just pointing the camera in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of filming the 3% who are stealing, You are filming the 97% who are rule-abiding citizens.
Exactly. The math is describing the exact same reality, but the psychological trigger is entirely different. Now, the social proof is working for you. You are telling the visitor that the dominant culture of the park is preservation.
Let's apply that to the NHS blood donation example. Because 4% is a really small number. You can't exactly brag about 4%.
Now, you can't brag about the percentage, but you can reframe the absolute numbers to create a sense of scale and community. Instead of lamenting that only 4% donate blood, which sounds pathetic and small, you flip it. You can honestly and proudly claim there are 2 million active blood donors in the UK, but we urgently need more to save lives.
Oh, wow. 2 million active blood donors. That sounds like a massive, powerful army of people.
It does. You are still conveying the urgent need for more, but you are highlighting a massive positive social group. You are telling the listener, look at this huge group of 2 million heroes. Don't you want to join them? Don't you want to be part of this community?
You are leveraging our evolutionary desire to join the herd, but you are pointing them toward a positive herd.
Precisely.
I see how powerful that is. But as I think through the implications of this, I realize there's another massive hurdle we have to discuss. Sometimes the problem isn't just how we as communicators frame the statistics.
What do you mean?
Sometimes the problem is that the public's baseline perception of the issue is wildly, objectively inaccurate.
Ah, yes. This is a crucial dynamic known as the perception versus reality gap. And it completely scrambles our ability to use social proof effectively, because our actions are shaped by how we think others behave.
So what happens when our internal estimates of everyone else's behavior are just flat out wrong?
Right. If I think everyone is cheating on their taxes, I'm more likely to cheat on mine, even if, in reality, hardly anyone cheats.
Exactly. In 2014, the research firm IPSOS Morai conducted a fascinating study of 1,000 UK adults to test exactly this. They asked the public to estimate the scale of various social issues and behaviors.
And the results showed that the public was consistently and often dramatically wide of the mark. Human innumeracy, our inability to intuitively grasp large-scale statistics, is a real problem.
I found the specific numbers in this part of the text staggering. For example, when asked about teen pregnancy, the public guessed that 16% of 15 to 19-year-old girls gave birth each year.
16%.
Think about what that means. If 16% of teenagers are having babies every single year, that is a massive systemic societal crisis.
But the actual reality, according to the UN data at the time,
It was just 3%. The public's perception was more than 5 times higher than reality.
and it wasn't just negative behaviors they misjudged, it also applied to positive civic duties. When asked about voter turnout, the public guessed that a mere 49% of eligible adults actually voted. They assumed the majority of people were apathetic.
And the reality.
The reality was a much healthier 66%.
So why are we so exceptionally bad at guessing these numbers? Is it just that human brains aren't wired for statistics? Or is there an environmental factor at play?
It's largely environmental, driven by a cognitive shortcut called the availability heuristic. We judge the frequency or likelihood of an event by how easily we can recall examples of it from our memory.
And what fuels our memory? The information environment we live in.
Exactly. The media, charities, and political campaigns are constantly fighting for our attention in a very crowded economy. To break through the noise, they often talk about social problems in panicked, exaggerated, or extreme terms.
Right. You never see a news headline that says, teen pregnancy remains stably low at 3%. You see headlines that scream, crisis at the high school, or voter apathy epidemic.
Exactly. The media focuses on the anomaly, the crisis, the exception. But the unintended consequence of this constant drumming of a long-missed language is that it slowly warps the public's perception of the baseline.
It just chips away at it.
Yep. When you hear about a problem every single day on the news, the availability heuristic tricks your brain into assuming it is the absolute norm. You assume everyone is doing it.
So what does this mean for the business owner or the marketer trying to apply this? If I'm selling a solution to a problem, my instinct might be to lean into that fear. Like if I sell cybersecurity software, I might want to terrify my clients by making them think every single business in the world is getting hacked every day.
And that would be the exact trap we are discussing. If you exaggerate the issue, you might inadvertently normalize the vulnerability.
You might make the client think, well, if everyone is getting hacked, it's inevitable. Why bother spending money on this software if the bad guys always win?
Exactly. So how do you counteract that? You have to explicitly check if your customer's perception of a problem diverges from reality. Do some basic market research. If your target market thinks a bad behavior, say poor password management, or eating unhealthy food or skipping routine maintenance on their car is way more common than it actually is, your marketing should not validate that fear.
Your marketing should aim to close that gap by revealing the healthier, truer statistics.
Exactly.
Give me a hypothetical of what that sounds like.
Let's say you run an eco-friendly brand selling reusable water bottles, and you know the public thinks nobody recycles. Your marketing shouldn't be, the world is drowning in plastic because nobody cares.
Because that validates apathy.
Right. Instead, you aim to close the perception gap. You say, did you know that 70% of households in your city are actively trying to reduce their plastic waste? Join the movement.
You want to be the brand that says, actually, most people are doing the right thing, and here is how our product helps you join them.
That's the way to do it.
That makes total sense when the reality is actually better than the perception. But we have to address the elephant in the room. This is the hardest hypothetical of all, and I've been thinking about this since we brought up Wikipedia.
Oh, I know where this is going.
What happens when the truth is genuinely ugly?
You mean when you can't just flip the stat?
Exactly. What if the bad behavior genuinely is the absolute majority? Let's go right back to the Wikipedia or the Guardian examples. It is a factual, undeniable reality that truly only a tiny, tiny fraction of people pay for those services.
Yeah, 99% of people freeload.
That is the mathematical truth. If you put up a banner that says 1% of people pay, you trigger negative social proof because the number is so small. But if you try to flip it and focus on the non-action, you say 99% of people don't pay, and you are still triggering negative social proof. You are mathematically trapped. How do you market your way out of a reality where the deviants are the 99% majority?
It is the ultimate marketing bind. It feels like a checkmate. But behavioral science offers a really elegant escape hatch. It requires understanding a deeper psychological distinction between two different types of social norms: descriptive norms and injunctive norms.
Okay, let's unpack those terms because they sound academic, but I know the application is highly practical.
They are very practical. A descriptive norm is exactly what it sounds like. It describes what people are actually doing.
Okay.
It is an objective observation of how most people behave in reality, regardless of whether that behavior is good or bad. So in the case of The Guardian or Wikipedia, the descriptive norm is most people read this website for free.
Right. It's just the raw data of human behavior.
An injunctive norm, on the other hand, is not about what people are doing. It is about what people believe they should do.
Okay.
It is about what is culturally approved, morally right, or generally frowned upon by society. It's about our shared values.
Let me see if I'm tracking this distinction with an analogy.
Sure.
A descriptive norm is like standing on a highway overpass with a radar gun. If you measure the traffic, you'd see that 80% of cars are going 10 or 15 miles over the speed limit. The descriptive norm, the reality of the situation, is everyone speeds on the highway.
Exactly.
But the injunctive norm is the societal belief that speeding is dangerous, it's illegal, and it's morally wrong to put other drivers at risk. Even the people who are currently speeding would probably agree with that statement in a survey.
That is a perfect analogy. You can be violating a norm while simultaneously believing in it. And this is where the escape hatch opens.
How so?
If the descriptive norm is working against you, if the vast majority of people are currently doing the bad behavior and you can't flip the statistic without highlighting the problem, you must abandon the descriptive norm entirely in your messaging.
Do not talk about what people are doing.
Right. Pivot your marketing exclusively to the injunctive norm. Talk about what people believe is right.
The text gives a really compelling, data-driven example of how The Guardian could actually fix their failing ad using this exact pivot.
Yes, the author of The Choice Factory, Richard Shotton, actually conducted a nationally representative survey regarding this exact issue of paying for online news.
To see if an injunctive norm existed.
Exactly. He wanted to see if an injunctive norm existed that could save The Guardian's messaging. He found that of the people who offered an opinion on the matter, a solid 62% believe that it is unfair to use a news site without paying if they have been explicitly requested to do so.
That is a massive data point. 62% think it's fundamentally unfair to freeload.
It completely changes the game. So the practical takeaway here is profound. If you are faced with a situation where freeloading or pollution or skipping appointments or any undesirable behavior is the actual statistical norm, stop talking about the behavior.
Stop saying fewer people are paying.
Right. Instead, publicize the widely held belief that the behavior is wrong.
But wait, I have to stop you there because my immediate reaction to that is, does guilt actually work? If you tell me I'm being unfair, my instinct isn't necessarily to open my wallet.
No, of course not.
My instinct is to get defensive, close the tab, and go read a different website. Isn't pivoting to an injunctive norm just a fancy academic way of saying we should guilt trip our audience?
That's a great challenge, and it's a very fine line to walk. It's not about pointing a finger at the user and calling them a bad person. It's about identity.
Identity.
Yeah. It's about tapping into a shared moral compass rather than a shared bad habit. You don't say, you are being unfair. You say, our community believes in fairness.
Oh, I see.
The Guardian shouldn't say, you aren't paying. They should say, the majority of our readers believe that quality, independent journalism deserves to be paid for. Support us today.
Quality journalism deserves to be paid for. That changes the whole feeling in your gut when you read it.
Yeah.
It doesn't make me feel attacked. It makes me want to align with the good guys. It invites me to join a moral majority, rather than making me feel like I'm sneaking in the back door with the rest of the freeloaders.
It elevates the user to an aspirational standard. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, it's about realizing that numbers and statistics have moral weight depending entirely on how you frame them.
You are either using social proof to align your customer with a destructive, apathetic herd, or you are using injunctive norms to align them with an aspirational, values-driven community.
That's beautifully put.
Let's step back and synthesize all these threads, because we've covered a massive amount of psychological terrain today, and it has profound implications for how we interact with the world.
It really does.
The soul of this chapter really comes down to this core evolutionary truth. As social animals, we are constantly, subconsciously scanning our environment. We are looking to our peers for a map of how to act, because our brains are desperate to fit in and conserve energy. If your business communication, your ad copy, your charity plea, or your employee memo highlights how many people are currently walking off a cliff, human nature dictates that your audience will blindly follow them over the edge.
You are literally handing them a map to failure and telling them it's the most popular destination.
To actually change behavior, you must illuminate the right path. And you can do that in two ways. First, if the numbers support it, you can show them the massive crowd that is already walking the good path that's flipping the stat.
Right.
Second, if the crowd doing the right thing is actually very small, you abandon the behavioral statistics altogether. You remind people of the shared cultural values and beliefs that point the way that's utilizing injunctive norms.
It ultimately comes down to taking responsibility for the psychological environment you are creating for your audience. And I want to leave you with a provocative thought to really chew on as you go about the rest of your week.
Please do.
Think about your own digital environment, the platforms you use daily, the apps you subscribe to, the newsletters sitting in your inbox. Start looking for the matrix.
Look for the matrix. I love that.
How often are you being quietly, accidentally nudged by negative social proof without even realizing it? How often are well-meaning brands telling you that everyone is doing the wrong thing?
That's a great question.
And much more importantly, look inward at your own work, your own projects, or your own business. How many sales, how many conversions, or how many donations are you losing right now because your website is accidentally telling people that nobody buys?
That is a terrifying but incredibly necessary question to ask yourself. You could be running a crime promotion strategy right on your landing page and not even know it.
Exactly.
Now that we know the absolute dangers of accidentally blending in with the bad behavior of the herd, how do you make sure your brand stands out from the crowd in the first place?
That's the next big question.
Join us on our next deep dive as we explore the von Riestorff effect, why the human brain is hardwired to remember the bizarre, and why playing it safe in business is actually the riskiest thing you can do.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.